Chapter 1987. Next, one after another, specks of light appeared around Luo Fan's position, constantly producing a stronger and stronger attractive force, attracting him to those specks of light. For the first few spiritual lights, he easily broke free from the suction forces with his own power of laws, and in the end, he easily broke free. However, as time passed, the strength of the spiritual lights continued to increase, and in the end, the density of the spiritual lights also kept increasing, forcing him to gather all of his power to resist the suction forces of the numerous spiritual lights. Every spiritual light represents a fork in the road. If I go through the spiritual lights, I'll be walking into a fork. In the end, Luo Fan came to a realization in his heart and analyzed the essence of the spiritual light. During this process, his expression became more and more firm, and he became more and more determined to reject the spirit light. Up until now, he was constantly circulating his power of laws, trying his best to resist the suction forces of the fork in the road, and trying his best to maintain himself on the right path. In this pitch-black darkness, time had no meaning at all. Even with Luo Fan's perception of time, he didn't know how long he had been here. It seemed like it was only a moment, but it also seemed like it had been hundreds of millions of years. His surroundings suddenly turned into endless twinkling stars. Specks of spiritual light were densely distributed in the boundless void, flickering with dazzling light. At the same time, they also began to produce an extremely terrifying suction force, constantly pulling him. His body was constantly being pulled towards the place where the starlight was. The terrifying suction force was so strong that it was even on par with the force that was pushing him forward. Under such circumstances, he even felt that his speed of moving forward seemed to have been slowed down. Facing this endless and terrifying suction force, he couldn't move at all. However, Luo Fan's expression was extremely grave. He quietly felt the countless suction forces, and the power of laws in his body was gathering to the extreme. Layers of defense were formed inside and outside his body, isolating him from the pulling force of the outside world, so that his body could maintain the correct direction. Suddenly, Luo Fan saw a fatty moving forward with difficulty in front of him. This fatty was none other than the fatty who had mocked Gu Mu previously. He was also a cultivator who was even more powerful than the Supreme Emperor. However, this fatty was no longer as proud as he used to be. There was only panic and embarrassment. All of a sudden, he cried out in alarm and threw himself into a speck of spiritual light at the side. His figure completely disappeared without a trace. At this moment, the speck of light suddenly began to expand, gradually transforming from an ordinary star that filled the sky into the shape of a bright moon. On the bright moon, there were countless figures of light flowing about. There seemed to be countless living beings and endless power. Countless mysterious and frightening powers were constantly rotating and evolving within it. Vaguely, Luo Fan seemed to see the fatty turn into some kind of ordinary creature and throw himself into it, beginning to participate in the reincarnation cycle. However, all of this only lasted for an instant, and soon, it had completely disappeared. After all, it was another cultivator's encounter. How could Luo Fan see it so clearly? However, just what he saw was enough to make him extremely vigilant. Throwing himself into it would actually evolve into all kinds of complex and perfect things. What was the difference between that and a tribulation? The endless spiritual light in front of him attracted him endlessly. If he really threw himself into it, when would he be able to find the right path to the real Tao Master's path? Suddenly, a thought emerged in his mind. Dimensional protective magic treasure. The term he had heard from Hungry Wolf City Lord suddenly appeared in his mind at this time. According to Hungry Wolf City Lord, dimensional protective magic treasures were extremely important for the path to the Tao Master. He had heard this from the cultivator who had once walked out of the Tao Master's path. In this case, could the dimensional protective magic treasure be used here? As he thought of this, He looked at the endless path in front of him and the endless specks of spiritual light. He no longer hesitated. With a thought, his body's unique space-time dimension had already protected his entire body. His unique space-time dimension had formed a ball full of starlight spots. It looked like a large starry sky had been compressed and condensed on the surface of the ball. This appearance, at first glance, was much more gorgeous than before. However, as long as one looked carefully, they would find that the existence of those bright spots actually made the ball less complete, causing some places on the ball to become important, and some places to become secondary, losing the original balance. However, this change wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Under this change, the sphere seemed to be even more stable and powerful than before, and its wondrous effects were even more unfathomable. At this moment, a feeling of lightness suddenly rose from his heart, making him realize that his choice was right. The so-called dimensional protective magic treasure was really used here. Just as he heaved a sigh of relief, an indescribably terrifying suction force suddenly acted on his body. This kind of mental strength exceeded his imagination and all his preparations. At this moment, it had already brazenly pulled his body in another direction. There, a spiritual light spot was waiting for him. This spiritual light spot looked very ordinary, but it resonated with his aura. It seemed that he could faintly feel that there was a feeling that completely belonged to him. Oh no! At this moment, Luo Fan only had time to think of such a thing. His body had already collided with the spiritual light, and his body was completely wrapped by the spiritual light. It's practically sending itself to my door. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. At this moment, the light and shadow around his body fluctuated, and endless streams of light constantly streaked past him. Boundless power swept through his body, and a boundless sound pierced through his ears. At this moment, he felt that he seemed to be crossing an incomparably long and mysterious passage. It was leading to a completely unfamiliar world. At this moment, he suddenly discovered that the pushing force behind him was several times stronger than before. That terrifying force made it so that even with the protection of the unique space-time dimension, he couldn't struggle at all and could only be pushed by that force. He continued to move forward in the direction that the force dictated. That force continued to expand and move forward. In the end, it even exceeded the limit that his body could bear and directly penetrated into his body. As this force penetrated into his body began to rapidly change shape and essence. Gradually, it transformed into a brand new, completely different appearance. Fortunately, this force ultimately did not penetrate into the conceptual level. However, it did not change the concept of his existence. Therefore, although his physical body and his form were changed, his essence was not changed. It had even changed his power, but fundamentally, he had not been changed. If he wanted to, he could completely recover at any time through the concept of village. After an unknown amount of time, which seemed to be billions of years, but also seemed to be just an instant, the light and shadow around him completely stopped. His surroundings turned into darkness. At this moment, the force behind him continuously penetrated into his body. The powerful force that was constantly pushing him and transforming him had completely disappeared. He had finally returned to normal. What is this place? Luo Fan looked around. Although his body had eyes after the transformation, he did not have any powerful strength. He was at most an ordinary person now, and he could not see through his surroundings at all. Naturally, he did not know what was around him. Haha, there's another newcomer. At this moment, a voice entered Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan frowned. This voice was filled with cruelty and killing intent. When it said this, it was as if it was saying that food had been delivered to him. He followed the voice and looked in a certain direction in the darkness. That voice came from that direction. At this moment, he felt that his concept of existence seemed to have been forcibly frozen at the conceptual level. It was as if there was a huge concept that was billions of times stronger than his concept of existence sealing him in the outside world. Such a seal completely prevented him from manipulating the concept. In other words, now, the only thing he could rely on was his own will and this body that had been completely transformed and had no strength at all. Realizing this, Luo Fan's mind calmed down. Then let me see what the hell this road of Tao Master is doing. Such a thought flashed through his mind. Then, his heart slightly moved and his eyes narrowed. He was quickly familiarizing himself with the body he had just created. The circulation of vital energy and blood, as well as the circulation of power, were all quickly familiarized by him. Soon, he had full control of his body and completely mastered the bit of qi and blood flowing in his body. After mastering this bit of qi and blood, he changed his mind. This bit of qi and blood was stuck in his body and began to swim in his body in an indescribable way. As he swam, he felt all sorts of soreness and pain throughout his body. However, amidst this soreness and pain, his potential was constantly being stimulated. As his strength continued to increase, the various abilities of his body were rapidly becoming stronger. And the bit of qi and blood also began to grow bit by bit. It was as if it was also being tempered during this circulation, becoming more condensed and purer. Soon, a bit of blood light was condensed from his qi and blood. With a thought, this bit of blood light was instantly poured into his senses. As this blood-red light poured into his senses, the entire world he saw instantly underwent a tremendous change. In the blink of an eye, the darkness receded and was replaced by a dim scene. Here, there was a cave, an extremely huge cave that seemed to be the size of a dozen football fields. Above this cave, there were densely packed stalactites above his head and around him. Not far away, there was a figure chained to a stalactite. The person who spoke before was also chained to a stalactite not far away from him. According to Luo Fan's rough estimation, there were tens of thousands of people in this huge cave in front of him. There were tens of thousands of people who were chained. Everyone else is chained. What about me? Luo Fan looked down. He found that he was just standing in an open space. There were no stalactites around him, let alone chaining him. Ha ha ha, it seems that there is someone who can bear the punishment for us this time. The person who spoke just now spoke again. The person's clothes were ragged, and he was so thin that he looked like a bag of bones. His hair was messy and his eyes were blank. Obviously, he could not see the scene in this cave at all. Instead, he used another method to sense Luo Fan's arrival. Perhaps because of this, he did not notice that Luo Fan was not chained. What's there to be happy about? After all, it's only this time. Won't we still have to bear the punishment from now on? An old voice sighed at this time. Just once is enough. That person laughed. His voice was filled with cruelty, gloating, and unconcealable pride. It was as if watching others suffer was the most wonderful thing to him. Can you tell me what this place is, and what's going on here? Luo Fan just sighed. Boy, you must have entered the Tao Master's path by mistake, right? An old man said. These words. This made Luo Fan's heart tremble. He thought that this was just a derivative world, even if it was real. Everything was just a creation, and it should be completely isolated from the outside world. All the plot development was completely according to the rules of this world. It was impossible for it to know about the outside world, let alone the Tao Master's path. He did not expect that the person's words completely disrupted his thoughts. Yes. He immediately said solemnly. That's right. This is the Tao Master's prison. Anyone who violates the rules of the Tao Master's path will be thrown into prison. Once you enter here, there will be no hope of transcendence, and you will be imprisoned forever. The old man smiled bleakly. Tao Master's prison? Hearing this, Luo Fan was shocked. The Tao Master's prison? How is this possible? I just entered the Tao Master's path, and I haven't done anything yet. How could I make a mistake and be thrown into prison? I didn't do anything either, but I was thrown into prison too. Me too, me too. Same. Following these words, practically every figure that was chained to the stalactite began to cry out. All of them cried themselves hoarse, and all of them cried out their grievances. Anyone who heard this would involuntarily feel pity for them and feel that they had suffered a great injustice, ha 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 ha. However, very soon the topic changed, and they all laughed out loud. Their laughter was the complete opposite of their previous expressions of grievance. There was no comparison between the two. Seeing this scene, how could Luo Fan not understand that their behavior just now was simply to tease him? Of course, anyone who entered the prison would definitely say that they were innocent, newcomer. Everyone will say so when you enter here. But I suggest you quickly accept the reality. There will be 365 punishments here every day, and each punishment is enough to kill you. So, you'd better think of a way to get through this punishment while you still have some energy. By the way, I almost forgot to tell you that because you are a newcomer, there will be a show of strength. So, this time, we will only listen to the punishment, and only you will enjoy it. The old man said with a smile. Along with these words, the surrounding people all laughed strangely, taking pleasure in his misfortune. Just then, a buzzing sound came from nowhere. Then, chains rushed out of the ground like swimming dragons, and quickly rushed toward Luo Fan. In the blink of an eye, they had reached his side, and were going to entangle and lock him up. Your punishment is coming. Just then, the surrounding people laughed out loud. Even though he didn't know what it would feel like to be bound by these chains, Luo Fan didn't have any intention of testing it himself. At this moment, he circulated the vital blood in his body, causing his figure to move like a swimming dragon, and he easily dodged these chains. These chains were swift and possessed shocking strength. Moreover, they even contained an indescribable might. Normally speaking, even a golden immortal realm cultivator would be unable to resist such chains at all, and the cultivator would absolutely be chained up at the first possible moment and allow the punishment that was about to descend without end. However, it was obvious that this was nothing to Luo Fan. Even if he actually only possessed the body of an ordinary person, and he only possessed a little bit of vital blood condensed from his ordinary body. It was even to the extent that he was only 10 times stronger than an ordinary person. This sort of attack that was sufficient to make a golden immortal realm cultivator be unable to resist at all was useless against him, and it allowed him to easily dodge them and even seize the opportunity to counterattack. This seemed to be unbelievable, yet it was actually extremely normal. Chapter 1988. As his qi and blood circulated, Luo Fan's qi and blood continued to condense, and the quantity of his qi and blood continued to increase. Vaguely, the mysteries of the worldview of laws had been added to it, and the magical effects of the dermic power of laws were gradually born. Just his qi and blood alone was already enough for Luo Fan to display the effects of a connate zenith heaven realm cultivator. Now that he had the magical effects of the dermic power of laws, his power had surpassed the limits in the blink of an eye. For a time, the entire huge cave began to shake violently. There were originally only a few chains, but they suddenly increased by dozens of times. In an instant they were densely packed, covering the sky and earth as they came crashing down towards him. At this moment, the prisoners around him began to feel that something was amiss. After all, since these living beings were able to come to the prison of Tao Masters, they were obviously living beings who were originally on the path to becoming a Tao Master. No matter how weak they were, how weak could they be? No matter how weak their senses and thinking abilities were, how weak could they be? The various abnormalities in their surroundings were revealed at this moment. Naturally, they would be able to sense that something was wrong with the situation at this moment. Could it be that this person can still maintain his strength? That's impossible. If he could maintain his strength, how could he have been locked up here? Perhaps he can't completely maintain his strength, but he might be able to retain a little more of it. Help! Save me, save me. If I get out, I'll definitely become a slave and offer everything I have to you." Another cultivator began to cry for help. To them, every minute and every second in the Tao Master's prison was torture and pain, but they were able to escape from it. No matter what price they had to pay, they would not hesitate to do so. Hearing this, the others came to a realization. One by one, they began to make promises, as if they wanted Luo Fan to save them. Then he would be able to obtain everything they had. However, Luo Fan did not care about this at all. At this moment, the threat that the countless chains posed to him had increased by many times compared to the few chains from before. Even though he was already able to imbue some of the mysteries of the power of laws into his aura, he was still exhausted from running for his life. He couldn't even guarantee his own safety, so how could he have the time to pay attention to others? Looking at the current situation of the prison of Tao Masters, it seemed to be able to deal with the current situation with ease. This was actually not difficult to see, not to mention anything else. At this time, the prisoners could only confirm that there was a problem by listening, but they could not sense that there was a problem around them through the chains on their bodies. Under such circumstances, it was clear that the control of the Tao Master's purgatory was still rather perfect. Targeting Luo Fan would only target Luo Fan, and would not affect anyone else. Under such circumstances, how could it be justified to say that the Tao Master's purgatory could not control everything perfectly? Luo Fan's figure floated in the air, shuttling between the countless chains that stirred up time and space, as well as the laws of laws. At this moment, even though Luo Fan could not sense the changes in the surrounding laws of laws, he could clearly see the ripples that were constantly being born from the chains. They began to spread in all directions, gradually triggering greater and greater changes. At this moment, the entire cave had undergone a huge change. The area, which was originally the size of many soccer fields, had suddenly increased by 1,000 times. It looked boundless. However, although it had increased by 1,000 times, the stalactites were still as dense as before, and the prisoners were still as densely packed as ever. They did not become sparse because of the change. As if everything was the same as before, there was obviously only one possibility for this situation. That was, the original number of prisoners was already far greater than this number. It was just that due to certain laws and mechanisms. Therefore, it was not fully revealed. At this moment, the surrounding cultivators, many prisoners were making a racket. All of them looked excited, fanatical, and inexplicably nervous. To them, everything in the Tao Sovereign prison was something that they abhorred. Amongst all the things that they hated, the thing that they hated the most was the fact that they did not even change a single speck of dust when they joined forces. But right now there was clearly an earth-shattering change happening here. Regardless of whether this change was good or bad, or whether it would affect them or not, it was already enough to make them excited. Every single one of them was fanatical. Some of the living beings that were shouting fanatically were constantly making all sorts of promises. Perhaps some of them were sincere and wanted Luo Fan to save them, so that they could pay a huge price to thank Luo Fan. However, many of them were just saying it casually. In fact, he didn't have much hope. He didn't think that Luo Fan could really save them or help them. The reason why he was making such fanatical promises and shouting here was just to join in the fun. Naturally, Luo Fan was very clear about all of this. However, he did not have the time to care about it, nor did he care about it. At this moment, his figure was like a bolt of lightning, constantly shuttling through the entire cave, constantly dodging the endless chains and resisting the powerful laws that were crushing towards him from all directions. In the process, he did not find any exit from the various caves. In fact, as he looked around, he began to doubt whether this was a cave or not. This was because the cave was completely spherical. Up, down, left, right, front, back, and in all directions it was exactly the same. If it weren't for his excellent sense of direction and the presence of the numerous stalactites, he might have completely forgotten his position after turning a few rounds. How can I escape? At this moment, such a thought emerged in his mind. While being chased by the countless chains and crushed by the laws, Luo Fan's body was like a spring. The more he was pressured, the more he chased after him. More and more power would erupt from him. His qi and blood were constantly being tempered and improved during this process. Before he knew it, it had already been refined and raised to an indescribable boundary. That was the special characteristic of the law power. At this moment, it had already been strengthened to a boundary that was difficult to form. As long as he broke through this boundary, his qi and blood would be able to transform into the law power. Luo Fan was very clear about this, however. There was also another point that he was quite clear about. That was, as long as he refined the power of laws, his current body would explode in an instant. Everything would be completely swallowed up by the power of the nomological laws. The power of laws was an extremely advanced and mysterious power. The pressure of such a power was almost enough to completely collapse a small chiliocosm. Although his current body had been refined by his qi and blood and the law power, it had become countless times stronger. It had even vaguely reached the level of a Khanate Grand Luo. However, compared to the law power, it was still far inferior. Once the law power appeared in his body. If that was the case, then just the power produced by the law power was enough to completely destroy him. Devour, unless he could spend tens of thousands of years tempering and improving his body, only then would he be able to perfectly accommodate the law power of law. Normally, this would be a small matter. With his patience and his sense of time, this would only take an instant. He naturally could afford to wait. However, obviously, that was only under normal circumstances. At this moment, when he was facing the countless attacks in the Tao Master's prison. However, it was impossible for him to have tens of thousands of years to temper and refine his physical body. I can't delay any longer. After thinking for a while, he discovered that the power had already reached the extreme of the extreme. Even if it did not evolve into the law power, it was already about to break through the limit that his body could withstand and was enough to completely destroy his body. Luo Fan finally made up his mind. At this moment, he poured his will into the qi and blood. In an instant, the qi and blood underwent the most fundamental transformation. A sense of the world of laws was instantly born from the qi and blood. In the blink of an eye, the qi and blood completely collapsed, and a tiny, insignificant strand of law power was born from the depths of the qi and blood. After this strand of power was born, it was as if heaven and earth were being split apart. It directly destroyed his body and everything around him, and everything was completely absorbed into it. And at this time, this insignificant wisp of magic power of the laws produced a little improvement. It was so insignificant and so subtle that even Luo Fan wouldn't have been able to detect it if it wasn't for his level of senses. At this moment, everything about Luo Fan was completely absorbed by the law power. The power of the laws had completely become the carrier of his will, the carrier of his soul, and the carrier of his worldview. This kind of carrier naturally caused the law power to gradually give birth to all kinds of indescribable changes. It gradually turned into a ball that was filled with countless flickering lights. At this moment, the countless chains that were originally pouncing towards him seemed to be completely sealed by a powerful force and completely froze in the void around his body. At this moment, time seemed to have completely stopped. All living beings and wills in the entire cave and the entire Tao Master prison had come to a complete standstill. It was as if the entire world had suddenly come to a standstill. This is not the real Tao Master prison, but just a tiny projection. In an instant, Luo Fan came to a realization. At this moment of enlightenment, his concept of existence, which had been completely frozen, suddenly broke free from all restraints. As his concept of existence broke free from all restraints, his concept of existence began to rapidly recover. Under this change, His body and everything about him began to appear out of thin air on this plane of reality. Not long after, he had already transformed into a lifelike body and regained his normal appearance and supreme power. At this moment, faced with such a situation, with a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. The first wisp of law power that he had previously condensed was sucked into his body. As he absorbed the wisp of law power, the law power around him began to give birth to subtle changes and seemed to become more compatible with him. It also became more compatible with the world of laws. This situation was only natural. After all, this wisp of nomological power was condensed from his chi and blood. It was completely condensed from his view of the world and his own will. Such an existence, whether it was his compatibility with him or his world view, was unprecedentedly strong. Compared to the original law power, it was only natural that it was more compatible. Sensing the subtle changes in the law power, Luo Fan could vaguely feel it. His strength started to rise once again, and his gaze towards his surroundings had already become clearer. There was indeed a Tao Master's prison on the Tao Master's path. However, this Tao Master's prison wasn't the one in front of him. This was just an extremely insignificant projection, like a small, faint shadow left by a mountain in a small valley. The reason why he broke into this place was because he had activated his unique space-time dimension in the path and triggered a reaction from the path itself. Naturally, this kind of projection was drawn towards him, and in the end it wrapped around him. In other words, activating the power of the space-time dimension in the passage that had yet to enter the Tao Master's path was a violation of the rules of the Tao Master's path. How do I go back now? Luo Fan looked around. This was a projection of the Tao Master's prison, but it didn't mean that it was easy to get in and out of here. In fact, there were countless projections of the Tao Master's prison in the surroundings. His projection was just one of the most ordinary of them all. It wasn't difficult to get out of this projection. As long as he exerted some force, he could get out of this projection. However, after leaving this projection, he would fall into the countless projections. He would be surrounded by the countless projections. He couldn't leave the countless projections and return to the real passage. The real path, at this moment, even Luo Fan couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. With a slight thought, his figure shook and countless cracks appeared on the projection of the Tao Master's prison. It was as if countless dense spider webs had wrapped up every inch of space and time in the projection. So, everything is just a projection. At this moment, a cultivator suddenly said. Luo Fan was startled. He looked towards the source of the voice and found a cultivator sitting cross-legged on a stalactite in a place extremely far away from him. The chain that was originally binding him had already broken into countless pieces at his feet. It was obvious that when Luo Fan was fighting against the projection of the Tao Sovereign's prison, the cultivator had used his own methods to break free from the chains that were binding him. It's a pity indeed. Luo Fan smiled. The cultivator turned to look at Luo Fan and said, "However, I still have to thank you. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have been able to enjoy the pleasure of breaking free from the Tao Master's prison, even though it's just a projection." The cultivator was a skinny middle-aged man. He sat there cross-legged. Although his clothes were ragged and his face was sallow and muscular, he gave off an indescribable aura, as if he was the ruler of the universe sitting at the center of the universe. The countless cracks created by the projection did not affect him at all, as if he was a separate entity and had no connection with the projection of the Tao Master's prison. Faced with such a situation, an indescribable expression appeared on Luo Fan's face as he said, "I didn't expect a powerful existence like you to be imprisoned in the Tao Master's prison. I've now recovered some of my main body's memories. In fact, there are too many existences like me in the Tao Master's prison. If you're lucky enough to enter, you'll definitely be able to broaden your horizons." The middle-aged man chuckled. Hearing this, Luo Fan shook his head helplessly and said, "Forget it, I don't want to enter such a place again. At this moment, everything in the projection was completely destroyed by the cracks, leaving only the middle-aged man and Luo Fan. The air of freedom. The middle-aged man took a deep breath at this moment. With a sigh, countless cracks appeared on his body. Then, his entire body collapsed like a pile of fine sand. In the blink of an eye, he had completely disappeared without a trace, and not a single trace could be found. Faced with such a situation, Luo Fan could only sigh and say, "Rest in peace, fellow Taoist." With the appearance of the middle-aged man, he felt a great pressure in his heart. The cultivator's strength was comparable to his, but even such an existence could not resist the imprisonment of the Tao Master's prison. The Tao Master's prison was more terrifying than he had imagined. Chapter 1989. He was in a place where there was no time, space, matter, or energy. Countless projections of the Tao Master's purgatories were densely packed in all directions, within his field of vision. According to Luo Fan's estimation, there were hundreds of millions of projections of the Tao Master's purgatories that he could see with his naked eyes. Amidst the endless projections of the Tao Master's purgatory, there was no time, no space, no matter, no energy, and he was now in a nothingness. Appearing in such a place of nothingness, Luo Fan frowned. It wouldn't be difficult to break out of such a place, but it wouldn't be easy to find the right path and rejoin the Tao Master path. With a thought, he casually chose a direction and moved forward. In fact, there wasn't much difference in the direction he chose in this place where there was no space. The result would be the same no matter what direction he chose. Even though he had fully recovered his power, Luo Fan was still at a loss as he walked among the projections of the Tao Master's purgatories. No matter how long he walked, or how many Tao Master's purgatories he passed through, the surrounding light and shadows all looked the same. There wasn't any difference from when he first saw them. From time to time, a Tao Master's prison would explode in the endless projections of the Tao Master's prisons, and living beings would emerge from within. However, these living beings would quickly dissipate. They were all projections that were connected to the Tao Master's purgatories and brought about by the collapse of the Tao Master's purgatories. Naturally, it meant that they had collapsed. However, for such existences to be able to break free from the Tao Master's purgatories, from a certain point of view, their personal strength had also reached an unimaginable level. It was as if a living being was able to break free from someone's memory. It was as if they had broken free from that person's memory and descended into reality. It's really here. On this day, Luo Fan met another living being that broke through all the shackles and transcended from the projection of the Tao Master prison. At that moment, he heard that person say these words. This figure was dressed in ragged clothes, and his body was thin and weak. He looked like an old man, and there was an aura of absolute power around him that seemed to be able to suppress everything. An existence that could make everything tremble in front of it. That person's body was also covered in countless cracks, as if he was about to disappear along with the Tao Sovereign prison. However, compared to the others that Luo Fan had encountered in the past, this cultivator was even stronger. At the very least, the essence of his existence was even stronger. He was actually able to maintain himself, albeit barely. Rather, he did not immediately collapse. Very soon, the creature discovered Luo Fan, who was shuttling back and forth between the countless projections. An indescribable look of shock appeared on its face. "Your real body is here?" he cried out in surprise. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled helplessly. "Yes, but I don't think this is something to be happy about, right? Of course it's worth celebrating. His true body was here. At least it's better than being projected here." The old man sighed at this moment. If his projection was here, didn't that mean that his true body was in the Tao Master's purgatories, and that he was brought here by the projection? No matter what, it was a great misfortune. Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded and said, "Indeed. Fortunately, my true body is here. Otherwise, my true body would be in the Tao Master's purgatories." Since you're here, it must be your first time entering the Tao Master's path. I have something that I need your help with. I'm willing to guide you on the path to transcendence from here. Are you willing to do so? Hearing this, Luo Fan only smiled and said, Feel free to speak your mind. If I think it's easy, I'll do it. If it's too troublesome, then forget it. Although he wanted to leave the countless projections of the Tao Master's purgatories, he never thought that it was an unsolvable problem. The reason why he was stuck here was because he was not familiar with the projections of the Tao Master's purgatories. After a period of time, when he became familiar with it, he would naturally be able to understand the essence of the Tao Master's purgatories and transcend from here. Under such circumstances, agreeing to something too troublesome in exchange for a path to leave this place was not something he could accept. Seeing this, the old man smiled and said, Of course it's not too difficult. It's a piece of cake for you. Cultivators like us naturally understand each other's confidence. Why would I give you something too difficult for something like this? Luo Fan, on the other hand, was interested in his thoughts and immediately asked, I wonder what fellow cultivator is talking about? After you enter the Tao Master's purgatories, you just need to set up a Tao mark in my image. The old man smiled and said. Hearing this, Luo Fan already knew what the old man was thinking and could not help but secretly admire him. I didn't expect you to have such a way to transcend the Tao Master's purgatories. It's really admirable. In that case, I agree. At their level, cultivators would naturally possess all sorts of unimaginable powers and abilities. Setting up a Tao mark in one's image was not a big deal for ordinary cultivators. On the contrary, the existence of such a Tao mark might even expose one's image and cause some special trouble. However, for existences at the level of Luo Fan and the others, even if it was just a little image, it would still have incredible power. It could create an unbreakable connection with the main body. Just like at this moment, according to the old man's words, setting up a Tao mark on the main body of the Tao Master's purgatories. Then, as long as the Tao mark had the old man's image on it, the Tao mark would establish an extremely mysterious connection with the old man. This connection was enough to make the Tao mark a part of the old man. Then, the old man could use various subtle means to transfer the essence of his existence to the Tao mark. In this way, with enough time and energy, he would eventually be able to replace the position of the Tao mark with the main body. Then, his main body would be able to escape from the Tao Master's purgatories. The old man was not at all surprised that Luo Fan could see through his intentions. After all, an existence that could cause so many Tao Master's purgatories to block his way forward could not be a weak existence. It was perfectly normal to have such a perspective that could see through his intentions. Hearing Luo Fan's agreement, the old man did not intend to make him sign any contract. He pointed with his finger and a speck of spiritual light rushed out from his hand and appeared in front of Luo Fan in the blink of an eye. This speck of spiritual light was none other than a huge amount of memories. Seeing this spiritual light, Luo Fan smiled slightly and caught it with his hand. The memories contained in the spiritual light had already appeared in his mind, and he had easily grasped them. The memories contained the old man's research on the Tao Master's purgatories, as well as all the information he had collected in the past. It contained the way to leave the Tao Master's purgatories. After glancing through the countless materials and information, a faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. To him, the most important information was not the way to leave the Tao Master's purgatories. Instead, it was information and descriptions about the Tao Master's purgatories. Because, as long as he knew this information, finding the path based on these descriptions was already a piece of cake for him. In fact, the way he could find might be even smoother and more direct than the old man's. At this moment, the old man bowed towards Luo Fan, and the countless cracks on his body suddenly spread all over his body. In the end, with a single tremor, the old man was torn apart and turned into dust. In the end, even the dust had been completely destroyed, and all traces of its existence had disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, Luo Fan returned the greeting. Although it was just a transaction, the old man had brought him enough benefits and saved him a lot of time. No matter what, it was something he was grateful for. After the old man disappeared, Luo Fan no longer wandered around like a headless fly. He sat down cross-legged in the endless Tao Master's purgatories, and waves of law power began to radiate from his body. They gradually weaved in the surroundings and turned into an indescribable shape, gradually forming a Tao Master's purgatories. Although the projection of the Tao Lord's prison was extremely mysterious and profound, it was not a difficult task for Luo Fan, who had seen it countless times and seen it destroyed countless times. To construct the projection of the Tao Lord's prison was definitely not a difficult task. Soon, a complete Tao Master's purgatories projections appeared in the void. The Tao Master's purgatories projections were spherical and vaguely different from the other Tao Master's purgatories projections. On the contrary, it was more like Luo Fan's world of laws and more like a scene formed from his own world of laws. At this moment, the surrounding Tao Master's purgatories projections began to tremble slightly. The Tao Master's purgatories projections seemed to have appeared randomly and were not connected to each other. However, that was only the surface. Given the mysteriousness of the Tao Master's purgatories, how could they not be connected to each other if they came from the same source? In fact, they were a complete entity. Every Tao Master's purgatories projection was closely connected to all the other projections. The destruction of any projection would in fact trigger an indescribable change in the other projections. It could even be said that the destruction of every projection would naturally trigger the birth of a Tao Master's purgatories projection. The reason why Luo Fan had not noticed it before was because there were simply too many projections of the Tao Master's prison. There were so many that he could only see a tiny portion of them, and was unable to see the entire picture. Naturally, he could not recognize the projections that were born at the same time as the Tao Master's prison's projection was destroyed beyond his line of sight. Under such circumstances, among the numerous projection systems of the Tao Master's purgatories, there was suddenly an additional projection that should not have existed. A projection that was not connected to the other projections. One could imagine how much of an impact this would have on the entire system. At this moment, faint rattling noises could be heard coming from the endless projections around him. The most obvious was, at this moment, among the countless projections around Luo Fan, many of them began to shake violently, as if they could no longer find their position and were trying hard to maintain a balance. At the same time, Luo Fan could already feel an indescribably terrifying pressure coming towards him from all directions. Or, to be more specific, it was crushing towards the Tao Master's purgatories projection that he had constructed. The crushing force was extremely powerful, and all sorts of crackling sounds continuously emerged from the Tao Master's purgatories projection that he had constructed. Faintly, cracks continuously appeared and disappeared under Luo Fan's control, restoring the projection to its original state. Of course, the most important thing was that the shape of the projection was actually the shape of Luo Fan's worldview. Under such a shape, its ability to withstand powerful forces was unimaginably strong. It was not to the extent where it was completely unable to withstand such a crushing force. It completely collapsed. However, this was only temporary. As the oppressive force around him grew stronger and stronger, Lin Fan's body began to tremble. As the repulsive force of the entire system grew stronger, the countless cracks that appeared on the surface of the projection began to increase. Each crack became more and more mysterious, and the speed at which they appeared after disappearing became faster and faster. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan, who was sitting cross-legged in the middle, naturally felt the pressure. For a moment, his body could not help but tremble slightly. He sat there quietly, and the countless information he had collected from the old man flashed through his mind. Information about this huge system. This was actually a checkpoint on the road to becoming a Tao master. Of course, it was not the final checkpoint, but it was an extremely important one. In this checkpoint, due to the nature of his own power and the influence of some mysterious mechanism, there would be various Tao Masters' purgatories that were completely targeted at him, forming an extremely stubborn system. Yes, this was a projection system that was completely targeted at him. In fact, the countless Tao Masters' purgatories that appeared in this system were, in fact, completely different. However, not all of them were like the Tao Masters' purgatories that Luo Fan had entered, where numerous cultivators were locked up in countless chains. In it, there were more different, more wonderful, more complicated, and more bizarre performances. Such a system was in itself complementary. If one simply wandered around, even if he wandered around for billions of trillion years, it would be impossible for him to leave this system. As for breaking through the void and directly entering it to leave, what he entered could only be a projection of a Tao Master's purgatory, and it was impossible for him to leave this place. According to the old man, the only way to leave this place was to change himself. As long as his characteristics changed, the projections of the Tao Master's purgatories that were born because of his characteristics would not be able to operate properly. At that time, traces would naturally be revealed. Once the traces were revealed, if one wanted to leave, they would be able to grab hold of these traces. This was the method that the old man had mentioned. However, it was obvious that this was not the method that Luo Fan had chosen. For Luo Fan, the essence of his existence was already completely linked to his world view of the laws. To him, changing the essence of his existence was equivalent to abandoning the world view of the laws that he had worked hard for countless years. How could he choose such a thing? Not to mention the fact that it was just to surpass a checkpoint before entering the Tao Master's path, even if it was to break through the entire Tao Master's path. He would definitely turn his nose up at it and choose not to care about the Tao Master's path. Therefore, at this time, what he chose was the method that he had deduced based on the countless pieces of information he had gathered. That was, to actively disrupt the operation of the Tao Master's purgatory itself. The more intricate a system was, the easier it was to disrupt it and break it. This was because the more intricate it was, the more fragile it would be. Even if it was such a mysterious Tao Master's purgatory system, all that was needed to break it was to add another projection of the Tao Master's purgatory to it. Of course, there was a prerequisite for this, and that was that the projection of the Tao Master's purgatory had to be strong enough to withstand the power of the system's own backlash. If it was unable to withstand the power of the backlash, then there was naturally no need to mention anything else. The power of the backlash alone was enough to take his life. How could he even talk about breaking the entire system? How could he even talk about transcending, leaving this system and this checkpoint? What Luo Fan was doing at this time was to resist the power of the system's backlash. The endless surrounding power swarmed in, constantly crushing the projection of the Tao Master's purgatory that he had constructed, impacting its structure, impacting his body, and impacting his world view of the laws. Chapter 1990. For the current Luo Fan, the previous situation where he couldn't find any loopholes or imperfections in his worldview had completely left him. For the current him, his current worldview was filled with flaws and imperfections. It could be said that apart from the spots of light on the surface of his worldview, everything else in his worldview was full of loopholes and imperfections. Under such circumstances, every time his worldview was oppressed and impacted, it was an excellent opportunity for him. It was a chance to polish his worldview. Every time he went through such polishing, he could feel that his worldview was once again improved, even if it wasn't by a huge margin. It was precisely because of this that he didn't care about the polishing at all. Instead, he seemed to be looking forward to it. He wouldn't let go of such an opportunity. In fact, he had chosen to use this method to shake up the entire prison of Tao Master's system because it was a rare opportunity to polish himself. Otherwise, with his ability, he would have been able to come up with other easier methods besides this one. Luo Fan sat there quietly, feeling the strong pressure brought by the projection system of the infinite Tao Master's prison around him. The constant rattling sounds came from the projection system of the infinite Tao Master's prison, and the light on it was constantly shining. It seemed that every time it crushed the light, every impact, it was enough to make the light purer and more dazzling. Through such polishing, he was even more certain that the spots he had obtained through the previous refinement were indeed stronger. Indeed, it was much stronger than the other positions. At least, the stronger the pressure. The more dazzling the light was, the more different it would be from the world view of other positions. Under such crushing pressure, countless cracks continued to form. At this moment, countless information emerged in Luo Fan's mind. All kinds of information about the world view kept emerging in his mind, and he began to work hard to reconstruct it. He wanted to form a more stable system to support the increasingly strong and irresistible pressure. This wasn't a simple matter. There were some things that could not appear with enough pressure. Without enough accumulation, it would not appear. Without enough inspiration, no matter how great the pressure was, it was impossible for him to obtain information that he couldn't get out of thin air, and he couldn't build the world view of laws that he couldn't build yet. However, this didn't mean that his construction was fruitless. After all, there were already those parts of light guiding the way, so there was still a vague direction for his construction. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for him to build the final and perfect structure in one go. However, during this construction process, every time he constructed, he would be inspired again. Compared to before, it was more or less improved. This was reflected in the fact that, apart from the light, the cracks on the sphere were slightly brighter every time they were repaired. Just like that, he repeated the cycle again and again. Again and again, he worked hard and attacked again and again, causing Luo Fan to completely forget the passage of time. He had forgotten everything else. In his heart there was only the mystery of the world view of laws. Again and again it was reconstructed. Time and time again it was crushed and broken. Fortunately, it was made of light. The outline of his world view of laws was strong enough to completely withstand the crushing force of the Tao Master's prison projection system, which gave him enough time and experience to carry out the cycle again and again. Otherwise, the projection of the Tao Master's prison that he had built would have been completely crushed when it broke for the first time, and even his own existence would have been completely eliminated. In that case, how could there be any effect of polishing? However, although the existence of the outline was enough to maintain his existence and prevent him from dying in the process, the pain was not reduced at all. Under the continuous impact and crushing of the powerful system, he felt that everything about him was constantly being ground down. The endless pain was enough to make anyone have a mental breakdown. Even he had to expend a part of his energy to resist, so that he wouldn't completely collapse and die. In this way, time passed slowly, and the shaking of the entire Tao Master's prison system became stronger and stronger. It was like a complete and delicate machine that had a gear stuck. When one could not crush the thing that was stuck in the gear, the impact of being stuck would continue to expand, and eventually spread to the entire machine, causing the entire operation of the machine to completely collapse. At this time, the projection of the Tao Master's prison that Luo Fan had built was the obstacle that was stuck in the gear. Because of its existence, the entire system produced a huge counterforce that crushed this obstacle, trying to crush it completely, so that the delicate system could once again operate perfectly. However, when this thing could not be broken no matter what, and continued to exist, the entire system began to gradually collapse. After an unknown period of time, perhaps it was only a moment, or perhaps it had been hundreds of millions of years. At a certain moment, Luo Fan, who was working hard to reconstruct his worldview, suddenly felt his entire body relax. The terrifying crushing and strangling force that had existed for an unknown amount of time even made him suspect that it would exist forever, made him feel as if he was in hell and would never be able to reincarnate, suddenly disappeared completely. It was as if it had never existed, and it made him feel an indescribable sense of relaxation, and an indescribable joy surged all over his body. What's going on? Luo Fan was confused at first, and could not figure out what was going on. Why did the pressure suddenly disappear, causing him to be unable to continue with his original plan of polishing the system? However, it was very soon. In the end, he still remembered what had happened. He remembered the most direct reason why he had built the projection of the Tao Master's prison. After understanding this, his eyes lit up. He knew that he had completely crushed the projection system of the Tao Master's prison himself. He had already transcended the extremely perfect and extremely difficult to transcend projection system of the Tao Master's prison. Looking around, the countless projections of the Tao Master's prison had already become extremely chaotic. At this moment, every projection was swaying around, constantly clashing with other projections, causing earth-shattering explosions to erupt. The two projections, along with the part of the void that they were in, were completely shattered. Gradually, the scene behind the void was revealed, the shattered projections of the Tao Master's prison. The shattering was continuous, layer upon layer. After shattering a projection of the Tao Master's prison, another projection of the Tao Master's prison would appear. Fortunately, the new projection of the Tao Master's prison was also constantly shattering. Otherwise, after shattering the void, he would fall into a new projection, or even be inside the projection. Compared to the void outside the projection, it would be even more troublesome. Looking at this scene, an indescribable smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. At this moment, there was naturally no need for him to maintain the projection of the Tao Master's prison that he had built. Compared to before, the projection of the Tao Master's prison that he had built seemed to be a little brighter, and the countless lights on it seemed to have dimmed a little. It wasn't that the lights had dimmed, but the background had become brighter. This kind of change naturally caused the light to dim at this moment. The brightening of the background represented a fact, and that was that there was a huge gap between the original brightness of the background and the original brightness of the background. The difference between the other parts of the world that Luo Fan had built and the light. It seemed to have shrunk. Although it wasn't much, it still meant that he had improved. Although it had shrunk, it also meant that he had improved. Sensing slightly, Luo Fan felt that his fourth tribulation seemed to have been brought forward. Although it wasn't by much, it was still brought forward. Sure enough, the path of Tao Master is the right one. At this moment, such a thought emerged in Luo Fan's mind. Layer after layer of the Tao Master's prison projections continued to shatter, and Luo Fan felt his body beginning to step into one projection after another, moving from one projection to another. Every projection seemed to be completely unable to withstand his existence, and once he entered it, it would immediately collapse, leaving nothing behind. This process went on for countless trillions of times. Even when Luo Fan almost suspected that this process would not end, he suddenly felt his body relax, and he had already arrived at an extremely familiar place. In the endless darkness, specks of spiritual light constantly shone in all directions, like stars in the sky. This was also the place that he was moving forward after stepping onto the Tao Master path. However, compared to before, at this moment, he felt that the incomparably terrifying power that was originally pushing him behind him had completely disappeared. In other words, he needed to rely on himself to find the right direction, and even more so, he needed to rely on his own strength to move forward in the right direction. This, compared to before, was obviously much more difficult. Feeling this change that he had not expected before, Luo Fan could not help but reveal an inexplicable smile on his face. Although this had increased the difficulty, for him, this was exactly what he wanted. He didn't come here just to see the end of the Tao Master's path. He came to the Tao Master's path to be honed. He wanted to improve his understanding of the world and improve his cultivation realm through the process of wandering. Under such circumstances, for him, the more difficult it was to move forward, the more effective it would be for him to temper himself. Naturally, it would also allow him to obtain greater benefit. In this case, why would he feel uncomfortable because of this change in front of him? After a while, Luo Fan had already identified the direction that he had been moving in for a long time. Slightly moved, he began to move in that direction. At this moment, he felt an indescribable resistance appearing in front of him, blocking in front of him. For every inch he moved forward, he needed to use up the strength of who knows how many tens of thousands of miles in the past. It could be said that almost every step. It was a trudge, and every step forward was a great torment. Every step forward was a great torment. It turns out that there is such a strong resistance, but I did not feel it at all before. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and his figure became more and more determined to move forward. At this time, the endless spiritual light around his body was still constantly producing various kinds of attractive forces at this time. However, this kind of attractive force could only be blocked by his unique spacetime dimension, and did not really affect his body. Fortunately, the resistance he was facing now only made him feel that it was difficult to move forward. But it was not to the extent that he could not move forward at all. If the surrounding resistance was completely acting on his body, at this time, he was afraid that at this time, he would be like a leaf in the wind and rain, only able to move around randomly. Among the countless spiritual lights, there were specks of spiritual light with all kinds of auras that Luo Fan was incomparably familiar with. Looking at those spiritual lights, he vaguely felt like he was looking at the primordial world, saw the earth, saw the universe, saw the perfect world that he had built, and so on. Fortunately, Luo Fan's own spiritual consciousness was not really distorted. He clearly remembered his own goal, clearly knew where exactly he was now, and did not change his goal because of the existence of this inexplicable spiritual attraction. He was immersed in it. Perhaps I can really enter that world, but so what? If I want to return to that world, there are countless ways to do so. Why use this method and give up my own path to return? Such thoughts kept appearing in his mind, causing his mood to become more and more resolute during this process. He did not know if it was an illusion, but as his mind became more resolute, the resistance that was blocking him seemed to weaken a little. However, even with Luo Fan's sensing ability, he was unable to confirm the extent of the weakening. Now, he could only wonder if it was an illusion. Just like that, an unknown amount of time passed. Luo Fan felt that he had already traveled at least 1 trillion light years. There was no aura around him as he moved forward. It had already become incomparably dense. In the past, the spiritual lights were like stars in the endless darkness. But now they had completely connected into a sea of light that spread out in all directions. Apart from the path he was moving forward, it completely blocked his view. Among them, there were even more spiritual lights that were indescribably attractive to him. In fact, he could even sense the aura of his loved ones and his parent. It made him feel that if he entered it, he would be able to see his loved ones that he had not seen for hundreds of millions of years and enjoy the joy of being a family member again. Regarding all of this, Luo Fan, who was already used to it, was not moved at all. He only focused on moving forward. After so many times, he finally confirmed that what he had felt back then was not an illusion. Every time he overcame the impulse in his heart and the powerful attraction, the resistance he had to endure had already weakened a little. It was as if the resistance had completely emerged from the bottom of his heart. As his spirit saw through certain things, the resistance also continued to decrease. The reason why he was so sure was very simple. After resisting the temptation time and time again, and seeing through the illusion time and time again, the resistance he had to endure was already many times weaker than before. It had reached the point where even ordinary people could easily sense it, let alone him. Now, such resistance was not even considered an obstacle to him. In the process of moving forward, he even had the spare energy to analyze the surroundings and carefully sense what was at the end of the path. From his senses, there was an incomparably grand and vast place in the distance that had even exceeded the limits of his senses. That place seemed to contain all the mysteries of the universe, all the secrets, and was the source of everything. That was obviously the road to Tao Master. Suddenly, Luo Fan's figure stagnated. He abruptly stopped moving forward and stopped in the middle of the passage. There was no other reason for this, but because at this time, he saw that there were countless forks in front of him. At the end of these forks, there seemed to be incomparably vast, as if it was the source of everything, as if it contained all the mysteries, all the truths, and all the mysteries. Is this the second stage? Looking at this scene, such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. The projection of the Tao Master's prison was clearly the first stage. Although the current hindrance was completely different from the projection of the Tao Master's path, it was clearly also a stage. If he wanted to reach the true Tao Master's path, he would obviously have to choose the correct path among the countless forks. Otherwise, he would have no idea where he would end up. Chapter 1991. I don't have any clue, so I'll just pick one at random. Luo Fan looked at the countless forks and carefully identified them for several years. He found that he could not find any difference between them and could not analyze any factors in them. After confirming that any of them was the real road to Tao Master, he could only sigh in his heart. This was also the last resort. There was no way to determine any road in this way, so he could only explore it himself and see if there were any mysteries in these roads, so that he could determine which was the right road. With this thought in mind, his heart slightly moved and he directly walked toward the road that was closest to him. The moment he stepped onto the path, the countless forks in the road around him suddenly disappeared, and the path he had chosen began to grow larger and larger. At this time, he felt some kind of indescribable power suddenly appear out of nowhere and directly bind his body. In a trance, he had completely lost his sense of the outside world and all control of his body. Countless lights and shadows flashed around him at this moment. It seemed that even time seemed to have become absolutely chaotic. The past, the present, the future, different timelines, different dimensions, at this moment, right where he was, intertwined in an unimaginable way, forming a state of absolute chaos. At this moment, even though he had his own unique space-time dimension to protect himself, he could barely ensure that his body would not be completely torn apart in this chaos and completely erased. He could no longer control his own power to resist any changes in the outside world. In the face of such a situation, Luo Fan's eyes flickered and spots of invisible light constantly flowed from his eyes. The countless changes around him were absorbed bit by bit into his heart, and all the changes became unprecedentedly clear in his senses. After an unknown period of time, the powerful power suddenly dissipated. At this moment, he discovered that he had arrived at a boundless starry sky. This expanse of starry sky was boundless, and it was dotted with countless stars. Among the stars there were countless kinds of power. It faintly revealed countless types of energy, and it was even to the extent that he could sense that there were various types of energy that he was familiar with. This is the starry sky of this Tao Master vast world. He did not know the name of this vast world, but Luo Fan called this big world the Tao Master Big World. Perhaps this was the true name of this world, or perhaps it wasn't, but in his heart this was the name of this world. The vast starry sky in front of him was filled with countless stars and special powers. It was obvious that this was the starry sky of the Tao Master Grand World. The reason why he was so certain was because he had obtained the painting drawn by the Tao Sovereign's disciple back then. After a long period of time, he had already become extremely familiar with the painting. Subsequently, He had also become extremely familiar with the starry sky of the Tao's sovereign great world. He recognized that this was the starry sky of the Tao Master Universe. Luo Fan was secretly shocked. This starry sky was incomparably vast and mysterious. This was only natural. If that was all, he would not have been so shocked by the starry sky. What shocked him was that the starry sky of the Tao Master Great World was not a real starry sky. Instead, it was a scene from the state of chaos that was projected onto this vast world. This starry sky was not so much a starry sky, but a projection of the state of chaos. Just as he realized this, a cold light flashed in his eyes. He suddenly felt that there were countless chaotic potentials surging around him, brewing and ready to erupt at any time. It would produce an earth-shattering effect, directly erasing him. The countless stars in the surroundings no longer looked like stars. Instead, they had turned into different parts of the world. I didn't expect these forks to be like this. Is every fork like this, or is it just the one I chose? This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. As this thought occurred to him, he began to carefully distinguish, looking in all directions, carefully searching for the star that belonged to the Tao Master Great World among the endless stars around him. Although this starry sky was a projection of the state of chaos in the Tao Master Great World, this projection was too vast and mysterious. Even the Tao Master Great World could find its position in this projection. In other words, he had to find the star that corresponded to him. In other words, the only way to find the way back to the Tao Master Great World in the starry sky was to find the location of that star. There were countless stars, countless types of powers, and countless types of laws. It was not easy to find a world that he could not understand the laws of. Fortunately, the surrounding starry sky was too real as a projection of the state of chaos. Even the various characteristics of the vast world had been projected, thus reducing the difficulty of his search by several times. Right at this moment, a wave of energy suddenly surged not too far away from him, and then a large hand suddenly stretched out from the void and grabbed ferociously towards him. The hand was not very large. At the very least, it was not very large compared to the boundless starry sky. It was only a few dozen feet wide. However, this giant hand contained countless laws, as well as a terrifying power that could destroy the world. The surrounding space-time seemed to be shattered and reshaped by this giant hand. In an instant, it changed into all sorts of indescribable and terrifying forms. It turned into millions of chaotic space-time scenes and began to rapidly press down on him. It directly sealed his surroundings and completely locked him. Is this a cosmic life form? At this moment, this thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. Any environment would give birth to all sorts of special life forms. It was not that one could not encounter them, but that one had not traveled far enough and had not seen enough. Not to mention other things, there were chaotic life forms even in the state of chaos. It was normal for there to be cosmic life forms in this real starry sky. In fact, there were all sorts of cosmic life forms in this starry sky. This was the true danger of the Tao Master Great World. It was also because of the existence of these cosmic life forms that the cultivators of the Tao Master Great World could not freely travel to the starry sky and explore the endless stars. Otherwise, this starry sky, which was a projection of the state of chaos, would be so mysterious. It even contained the endless mysteries of the perfect world and the great world. Just a little bit of it was enough to make any cultivator feel full. How could it be so empty and lonely for countless years? All of this. These thoughts flashed across Luo Fan's mind. But at this moment, he did not think too much about it. With a single thought, he raised his hand and pointed. In the blink of an eye, the power of Tao laws gushed out from his body and turned into a giant axe. In a flash, it was as if it could split the world apart as it slashed towards the hand. Or perhaps it should be said that the hand was 10 feet large. A claw. The great hand contained an inconceivable amount of power, containing an endless amount of laws and laws. It was strong enough to kill off all cultivators. However, under the giant axe condensed by Luo Fan's magical power, it was as fragile as an ordinary person's palm. With a flash of the axe, it had already been smashed into pieces. That's right, it was not smashed, but directly smashed. After the axe flashed, the giant hand had already turned into countless fine powder from the inside out. It turned into countless fine powder, and under the gentle shock wave, it had already collapsed, turning into smoke and dissipating in all directions. A mournful howl rang out from the surrounding void. It was a shrill howl. Like a wolf or a tiger, there was an indescribable fierceness hidden in the mournful howl. At this moment, the power hidden in the surroundings stirred slightly, and a huge figure emerged. It was a huge creature that looked like a gorilla. It was in the starry sky, but at this moment, it was holding on to its other hand that Luo Fan had just crushed. Its entire body was constantly trembling in mid-air. It howled miserably, and its eyes flickered with an incomparably fierce light as it stared at Luo Fan. Seeing this, Luo Fan naturally would not hold back. The giant axe condensed by the Tao laws in his hand flashed slightly and brazenly rushed towards the gorilla's body. At this moment, the huge gorilla had already reacted. Its body suddenly twisted and flashed in an attempt to dodge the axe. There was also an indescribable fear in its eyes. In an instant, the surrounding wind and clouds surged, and countless nomological laws condensed into layers of barriers that blocked in front of Luo Fan's giant axe in an attempt to block it and prevent it from moving forward. As for the surrounding pitch-black darkness, light and shadow suddenly flowed, and countless strange sceneries kept appearing and dissipating. All sorts of terrifying power began to rush towards Luo Fan quickly, trying to grind him to pieces. This kind of resistance could be said to be explosive, but the effect was not bad either. However, it was a pity that all this resistance was completely useless in the face of the giant axe condensed by Luo Fan's Tao laws. His giant axe seemed to directly transcend cause and effect, transcend time and space, and directly slashed across the body of the gorilla. As the giant axe slashed across, the howls of the gorilla stopped abruptly, as if it had never appeared. The entire gorilla began to turn into smoke and gradually dissipate. As the gorilla dissipated, the surrounding light, shadow, and power that had been stirred up by it began to gradually calm down. Not long after, everything had returned to the scene before the gorilla appeared. The entire starry sky became lonely again, as if Luo Fan was the only one who existed. At this moment, Luo Fan, who had retracted his axe, did not seem to be very happy. This was because he had already sensed that many auras were faintly gathering around him. Obviously, there were still countless cosmic creatures rushing over from all directions, ready to tear him apart and devour him completely. Although the cosmic life form that looked like a gorilla seemed extremely fragile in his hands and was directly crushed into nothingness by his axe, in reality, that was only because he was strong. It did not mean that the cosmic life form was weak. Normally speaking, even a supreme emperor would need to spend a lot of effort to deal with a cosmic creature. Even if they did not have to pay a high price, it was inevitable that they would be delayed. This gorilla wasn't even the strongest among the countless living beings in the starry sky around it. At most, it could only be considered an ordinary powerhouse. If it was delayed and the surrounding cosmic creatures gathered, even if the Supreme Emperor did not die, he would definitely lose a layer of skin. With such a life system, even if Luo Fan was countless times stronger than the Supreme Emperor. However, he could not completely treat it as trash either. In the face of their gathering, he had no choice but to leave and hide first. With a slight thought, countless parameters were integrated into the decomposition and transformation law. As the countless parameters were integrated, the decomposition and transformation law began to decompose and transform the chaotic laws around him. Not long after, the chaotic laws around his body had already started to split into various gentle states. Faintly, his presence was weakened to the limit. Under this change, the countless cosmic creatures that were originally surging around him began to become confused, and the originally unified gathering became even more chaotic. At this moment, a large area seemed to have suddenly turned from absolute calm to absolute chaos. Suddenly, there were countless flashes of light and shadows, and an endless amount of power surged and surged. An earth-shattering movement broke out. All sorts of sounds of fighting and the impact produced by the fighting kept coming from all directions. Obviously, after losing a target like Luo Fan, the conflict between the many cosmic creatures could no longer be suppressed. At this moment, it had already erupted around him, resulting in an extremely tragic fight. There are actually such contradictions. It seems that there are more races than I imagined. Luo Fan's eyes shone as he saw through the hidden laws of chaos in the starry sky. Seeing the countless starry sky creatures slaughtering each other, Yang Kai felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't easy to see through the chaos around him. If the gorilla hadn't appeared before, it would have taken Luo Fan at least several years of deduction to build up enough ideas to see through the chaos around him. But, with the gorilla as a contrast, he easily peeled away the surrounding fog and saw through the hiding methods of the many cosmic creatures. This was also the reason why he could easily see through the tragic battle between the countless living beings in the starry sky around him. The creatures in the starry sky had all sorts of shapes and sizes, but their bodies were generally huge. The gorilla just now wasn't small, but compared to the many cosmic creatures, it could only be considered small. In the surroundings, Luo Fan saw a huge space creature that was thousands of miles long and looked like a wild boar. At this moment, these cosmic creatures seemed to be absolutely irreconcilable with each other, and were engaged in an extremely tragic fight. Every burst of power contained the mysteries of time and space, as well as the profound truth of the rules and laws. The smell of blood was constantly stimulated at this time, and the surroundings were gradually tainted with the color of blood. However, this kind of blood color soon disappeared completely. The cosmic creatures were so powerful, and their blood itself also carried endless mysteries. After leaving their bodies, they quickly integrated into the chaotic laws around them, becoming a part of the chaos, or absorbing some laws and powers, transforming into various cosmic creatures or other strange creatures, and gradually disappeared. Seeing this scene around him, Luo Fan's eyes flickered, and he took everything into his heart. These cosmic creatures could be said to be born from absorbing the endless laws of the endless perfect world. Although they were just a kind of creature born from the projection of the chaotic state, they already contained some characteristics of the chaotic creatures. Comprehending it might not be enough to understand the mysteries of the chaotic creatures, nor the special truth of the chaotic state, but it was definitely enough for him to make some guesses about the state of the chaotic creatures, and enough to reflect some superficial characteristics of the chaotic creatures. These kinds of gains were not worth spending a lot of time to come to the starry sky to study. But since it had already appeared in front of him, he only needed to look at it and think a little to understand it, so he would not be stingy with this little bit of energy. The killing of the surrounding cosmic creatures lasted for a few days before it subsided. In the end, the only way to pacify the situation was not for some living beings to gain an absolute upper hand and kill all of the other living beings. Instead, when the killing reached a certain point, when the density of life forms reached a certain point, all the life forms in the star realm seemed to have regained their rationality and began to gradually disperse. They no longer cared about the other life forms in the star realm who were their sworn enemies. I didn't expect it to be this kind of balancing method. Looking at this scene, Luo Fan had a better understanding of the nature of the cosmic creatures. This adjustment rule that balanced the number of creatures according to the gathering density existed in many ecosystems. In fact, it was a not uncommon balancing method. Chapter 1992. This boundless starry sky was a projection of the primal chaos state. Under such circumstances, although the life forms born in the starry sky were not necessarily the projections of the primal chaos life forms, they were bound to have some sort of meaning to them. Under such circumstances, if there was a consciousness controlling the countless life forms in the starry sky, wouldn't it mean that there was a similar consciousness controlling the primal chaos life forms in the primal chaos state? After thinking about this, Luo Fan threw this thought to the back of his mind. Whether there was a great principal sense or not, it was meaningless to him at the moment. For him, it was more important to find the Tao Sovereign Great World, head to the Heaven Cave Peak, and enter the Tao Sovereign Path. With this thought in mind, he began to expel all kinds of distracting thoughts. He focused on sensing the endless stars in the sky, experiencing the aura emitted by the stars, comprehending the countless laws contained in the aura, and searching for what he was looking for. The stars represented by the Tao Sovereign Great World. Fortunately, what he was looking for was a great world, not a perfect one. With Luo Fan's current understanding of the starry sky, it was not a problem for him to distinguish between a great world and a perfect world. If he was looking for a perfect world, he would need to search for it from the countless stars in the sky, which was trillions of times more than a great world. In contrast, if he was looking for a great world, he would directly sweep through 99% of the stars in the sky, which would naturally make it easier for him to find the Tao Sovereign Great World he was looking for. Under the cover of the laws he was controlling, he was like a void in the starry sky. He did not attract the attention of the life forms in the starry sky at all. He quietly floated there, and no life forms came to disturb him. This gave him enough time and space to find what he was looking for. Even so, by the time Luo Fan truly locked onto the Tao Sovereign Great World, nearly 100 years had passed. It took him such a long time to find it. It was precisely because even though each of those stars represented a world, this place was not truly in a state of primal chaos, after all. Those stars were not the true world. Therefore, all the laws in the starry sky were bound to be distorted and deviated. There would inevitably be distortions and deviations. This distortion and deviation caused Luo Fan to have to go around quite a few circles in order to get the aura of the nomological laws leaking from each star. In this way, naturally, the time spent was much longer than before. It was precisely because of this that he had spent such a long time in the endless starry sky to lock onto a star that represented the world. It's actually so far away. Looking at the position of the star, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel a headache. The star represented by the Tao Master Universe was too far away from where he was. When he looked over, it was already in the deepest part of the starry sky. Even he was almost unable to clearly see the existence of the star, and was almost unable to distinguish the laws of the star. I'm afraid it's 1 trillion light years away. Luo Fan estimated the distance and sighed. However, no matter how far it was, no matter how many obstacles there was only one choice for him now, and that was to leave. At this moment, he no longer hesitated. With a slight thought, his figure turned into a ray of starlight and began to shoot in the direction of the star formed by the Tao Master Universe. Because he was already used to the concealment method of the cosmic lifeforms, Luo Fan was no longer the same as before. He turned a blind eye to the numerous cosmic lifeforms. Along the way, the numerous cosmic lifeforms appeared in his eyes one by one, allowing him to clearly identify how many or how powerful they were on his way. Sometimes there were weak cosmic lifeforms blocking his way, forcing him to take a detour. In this way, the distance he could move forward had increased by several times. In particular, this was a starry sky where the laws were completely chaotic. Even if Luo Fan had the decomposition and transformation law, he still couldn't change the surrounding laws once and for all. However, he was unable to change the laws of the surroundings once and for all. He was unable to truly transform this place into the world he was familiar with and manipulate the laws of the world at will. In fact, if he were to use the laws of decomposition and transformation, He would have to stop every time he moved forward and input the parameters again. Only then would he be able to achieve his goal of controlling the laws of decomposition and transformation again. Only then would he be able to continue moving quickly. Moreover, the time wasted was even less than the time wasted by flying. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan didn't use the decomposition and transformation law to transform the chaotic laws around him. Instead, he turned into a long rainbow and shot towards his target. After a few years, Luo Fan reevaluated the distance he had moved forward and found that the distance he had moved forward in the past few years was only 1/10,000th of the total distance. In other words, even if he just rushed over like this, it would still take him tens of thousands of years to reach his destination. This speed was already considered extremely fast for an ordinary person. After all, it was a distance of billions of light years. To be able to cross a distance of tens of thousands of years was really heaven-defying. However, it was obvious that for Luo Fan, this speed was definitely not enough to satisfy him. It took him tens of thousands of years to reach the Tao Master Great World. After that, he didn't know how long it would take him to find the Heaven Cave Peak and enter the Tao Master's road again. After that, he didn't know what was the difference between the Tao Master's road here and the road he wanted to enter, and it would take a lot of time. If he continued to delay like this, he didn't know when the fourth tribulation would descend. Maybe I should make use of those cosmic life forms. A thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. After all, he was not used to the starry sky and couldn't make use of the chaotic laws of the starry sky. However, it was different for those cosmic life forms. For those cosmic life forms, the chaotic laws of the starry sky were like the air in the eyes of ordinary people. They were also chaotic, but they had long been used to it and had become indispensable under such circumstances. Their use of the chaotic laws of the starry sky was instinctive. This didn't mean that every cosmic life form could surpass his current speed, but it meant that, among them, there must be cosmic life forms that surpassed his current speed. In this way, as long as he found such a life form, subdued it and used it as his mount, he would naturally be able to easily cross this incomparably long distance. To achieve the goal he wanted, the great world, after deciding on this goal, he no longer hesitated. In the past few years, he had avoided the many starry sky life forms in order to avoid complications. But this time, he directly headed towards the starry sky life forms. After staying in the starry sky for so many years, he already had a considerable understanding of the cosmic life forms. In his eyes, he already had a rough understanding of the different species of starry sky life forms. He already knew what kind of life forms were speed type, what kind of life forms were strength type, and what kind of life forms were superpower type. Soon, he had already locked on to a speed type cosmic life form not far from him. That cosmic life form didn't look big, only 100 feet long. Its entire form was like a swordfish. It flashed and swam in the starry sky. Occasionally, when it hunted, it only took a flash to pierce through its prey, causing the essence of the prey to completely disappear. This kind of life form didn't meet Luo Fan's requirements in terms of speed. However, he could use this life form to find the cosmic life form that met his requirement. This swordfish-like life form wasn't considered strong, at least compared to the gorilla-like life form that attacked Luo Fan previously. Its strength could only be considered equal. For such a life form, as long as he could restrict its speed, it would be a piece of cake for Luo Fan. His heart moved slightly. Luo Fan had already turned into a ray of light and brazenly arrived at the place where the life form was. This life form had no way of perceiving Luo Fan's existence, but it had an extremely strong life instinct. The moment Luo Fan arrived, it already sensed that its life was in great danger. Under the urging of this instinct, in a flash, it disappeared on the spot and dodged into the distance. This scene was somewhat beyond Luo Fan's expectations. However, he was Luo Fan after all, and his strength was far stronger than that of this swordfish-like creature. He suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed it. At this moment, He suddenly reached out and grabbed the life form in his hand. The life form struggled violently, and the surrounding laws constantly stirred and changed under its struggle. There were countless faint lights and shadows, and endless power surged and erupted within it. Faced with such a situation, Luo Fan frowned. This would attract the attention of many other cosmic lifeforms. If he wasn't careful, it might lead to countless cosmic lifeforms breaking out into a fierce battle like before. With this thought in mind, he no longer hesitated and instilled power into the swordfish-like lifeform. With a violent tremor, he brazenly knocked out the swordfish-like lifeform. A mournful scream came from the mouth of the swordfish-like lifeform. After that, everything became silent. The lifeform was already lying quietly in Luo Fan's hand like a dead object. Seeing that the other cosmic lifeforms were beginning to get restless, Luo Fan didn't dare to be negligent. He inputted various parameters into the decomposition and transformation law. In an instant, the laws around the swordfish-like lifeform changed, making the swordfish-like lifeform directly disappear from the view of the other cosmic lifeforms. As it disappeared, the surrounding cosmic lifeforms began to feel puzzled and a little commotion broke out. However, in the end, the source of the commotion was gone, and it began to gradually calm down. In just a short while, it had completely returned to its original calm state. Seeing this, Luo Fan heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, his heart moved slightly. Waves of perception under the enhancement of the law of dermic power began to slowly seep into the body of the swordfish-like lifeform before him and began to explore the depths of its bloodline. The swordfish-like lifeform was originally hundreds of feet long, but under the effect of Luo Fan's power, it had now been compressed to the size of a baby's arm and was easily grasped in his hand. Under his probing, the bloodline appeared bit by bit. In his heart, the swordfish-like lifeform in his hand gradually lost its original form and gradually turned into a clearer and denser bloodline. It began to gradually reveal its essence. This dark red bloodline slowly circulated in his hand, and there were all kinds of indescribable mysteries coming from it. Traces of chaotic laws were constantly stirred and faintly resonated with the chaotic laws of the outside world. This caused the two to become balanced, allowing the swordfish-like lifeform to be like ordinary air under the chaotic laws of the outside world. It was completely unaffected by the chaotic laws of the outside world. Instead, it continuously absorbed some mysterious power from the chaos. Perhaps there's no need to find a lifeform that's faster. At this moment, such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. Originally, he had planned to trace the bloodline back to the source of the swordfish-like lifeform. In other words, the source of the bloodline of the swordfish-like lifeform would be countless times faster than the swordfish-like lifeform. However, he now realized that perhaps there was no need to find the source of the bloodline at all. Perhaps he only needed to study the mysteries of the bloodline to understand the essence of the starry sky's adaptability to the starry sky. Then, he would be able to grasp this essence and move freely in the starry sky. Although this was a little more troublesome. Compared to looking for other starry sky lifeforms to be his mount, Luo Fan was clearly more inclined to this. After all, this was his own ability. After mastering it, the starry sky in front of him would no longer be an obstacle to him, and it might even become a help. Compared to relying on external forces, the benefits were simply too great. In the blink of an eye, Luo Fan had already made a decision. At that moment, his heart moved. With a slight tremble of the law power, he had already erased the body of the swordfish, completely extracted its bloodline, and condensed it slightly. A blood-colored crystal ball was condensed in front of him. The mysteries of the bloodline revealed from the crystal ball were extremely obvious and intuitive. In fact, it was even more obvious and intuitive than when it was inside the body of the swordfish. Still not enough. Seeing this, such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. His gaze also began to move along with this thought to the many starry sky lifeforms not far away. He wanted to study how these starry sky lifeforms adapted to the chaotic starry sky. Just one lifeform was obviously not enough. However, he had to get some of all kinds of lifeforms, and then extract the mysteries of their bloodline. Finally, he would be able to understand the essence of this adaptation, and then master this essence, so that he could also have such an ability. The surrounding lifeforms were not too strong, but they were all about the same level as this swordfish. This was inevitable. If their strength was not about the same, how could they coexist peacefully with this swordfish? After all, this was a complete biosphere. Luo Fan could easily deal with this swordfish, so naturally, he could also easily deal with those starry sky lifeforms. In just a few days, Luo Fan had completely dealt with hundreds of starry sky lifeforms around him. He even extracted all their bloodlines, turning them into blood-colored crystal balls that were laid out in front of him. They seemed to be reflecting each other's brilliance, but also seemed to be affecting and interfering with each other. It should be enough. Seeing this scene, Luo Fan thought to himself, there were all kinds of bloodlines, but it should be enough for him to extract the essence of these starry sky lifeforms that could survive freely in this chaotic starry sky. Because he had been killing wantonly here for the past few days, this area had gradually attracted the attention of other starry sky lifeforms. The weaker lifeforms naturally hid far away, not daring to approach this place. However, the more powerful lifeforms began to gather here, wanting to challenge the existence that was killing wantonly here. In this way, obviously, this place could no longer be a place for him to quietly study these bloodlines. Understanding this, Luo Fan did not hesitate. With a slight thought, he turned into an invisible light, directly heading towards the spot he had originally chosen. Even though it was a starry sky with completely chaotic laws, this place wasn't completely empty and devoid of anything. In fact, there were many places with the corpses of starry sky lifeforms, combining with the chaotic laws, forming various things like continents, islands, or even stars. These things floated in the starry sky along with the chaotic laws, becoming a foothold for many starry sky lifeforms. As for why the corpses of these starry sky lifeforms could exist, it was very simple. Just like how many lifeforms in a normal world would have fossils, these starry sky lifeforms also had all kinds of fortuitous encounters. Similarly, due to various accidents, their corpses would not be discovered by other starry sky lifeforms when they first died, but once they were discovered, their quality would have completely changed, turning into fossils that could no longer be eaten. In this way, they could naturally survive. Chapter 1993. The corpse of this cosmic lifeform looked like a huge tortoise. Its body was probably hundreds of thousands of miles wide. Even among the countless cosmic lifeforms, it wasn't considered small. On the back of this huge corpse, there were many cosmic lifeforms resting. However, due to the control of the consciousness, the density of these lifeforms was only a few times denser than the surrounding starry sky. It simply couldn't reach the level of the density of the lifeforms in a normal world. Luo Fan quickly landed on the back of this cosmic lifeform. Due to the interaction with the endless chaotic laws, the back of this tortoise looked fundamentally different from that of ordinary lifeforms. The uneven undulations, the mountains, rivers, and deserts that couldn't appear on the back of ordinary lifeforms, all told other lifeforms that this was no longer the corpse of an ordinary cosmic lifeform. The location that Luo Fan chose was on the peak of a tall mountain. This mountain wasn't the highest mountain on the tortoise's back, but it had the most perfect geographical location. Just like Mount Tai on Earth, it wasn't the tallest, but it had the most beautiful scenery. At a glance, the entire back of the tortoise could be seen. The countless terrains spread out, revealing the beautiful scenery. It was gorgeous, and it couldn't help but broaden one's mind. Due to the mixing of various laws, even though there were various terrains here, there wasn't an atmosphere like a normal world. Everything was in a vacuum. In other words, it was also shrouded in the chaotic laws of the starry sky. This was fundamentally different from the countless stars themselves. Although the countless stars were just a projection of the perfect world, as the source of the countless chaotic laws of the starry sky, they were also the source of the countless chaotic laws. The stars themselves also had all kinds of indescribable mysteries. Their own rules and laws were self-contained, but they looked like a perfect world. Of course, this was just the appearance. As the aggregation of the laws, they rejected all external forces and objects. Even Luo Fan couldn't really immerse himself in the world evolved from the laws of the universe. He could only look at the existence of these worlds from a distance, and at most, he could only slightly comprehend the laws of the universe. If it was in the past, Luo Fan would definitely devote all his energy to it, choosing the laws of the universe that he liked to comprehend, to stimulate his own worldview. However, at this time, in the face of the upcoming fourth tribulation, he couldn't waste such time. After all, the efficiency of doing so was too low. How could the countless perfect laws of the universe compare to the real big world? How could it compare to the mystery of the Tao Master Path that was specially designed by many true sages for cultivators to become true sages in the real big world? It was not a wise choice to delay his journey to become a Tao Master because of this, which was like throwing away a watermelon and picking up a sesame seed. It was absolutely not a wise choice. Just now, Luo Fan turned a blind eye to the many stars. He didn't regard those stars as the goal of his comprehension, and even at this time, he didn't choose those stars as his foothold. Instead, he used the corpses of the star lifeforms as his foothold. After all, it was already a foothold. Looking up from here, it was like suddenly returning to the Tao Master Grand World, seeing the boundless starry sky and feeling the vastness of it. Under such circumstances, in the face of such changes, Luo Fan looked for a long time, then sighed and casually waved his hand. He took out the many bloodlines of the star lifeforms that he had extracted these days and spread them in front of him. They turned into blood-colored crystal balls, like embellishments in the starry sky, completely changing the mountain where he was. At this time, the many star lifeforms around could not help but be in a commotion. Although the bloodlines of these star lifeforms did not contain much power, nor did they contain much terrifying power, they were the bloodlines of countless star lifeforms. Any one of these bloodlines represented the death of a star lifeform, and represented the extraction of the star lifeform's root. Such a large number of bloodlines piled up in one place, naturally condensing a strong sense of existence. It began to spread out, causing a huge pressure on the surrounding void, faintly forming an inexplicable pressure on the many lifeforms around. This kind of pressure was naturally a great impact on the star lifeforms that completely relied on their instincts to sense danger and understand the surroundings. At this time, they could not help but be affected, not daring to stay where they were, fearing that the existence that extracted so many bloodlines would suddenly have a whim and extract their bloodlines. If that was the case, they would not be able to survive at all. As mentioned before, under the control of the Great Consciousness, the density of lifeforms on the back of the star lifeforms could no longer increase. Now that the nearby lifeforms suddenly became restless and began to spread to other places, it naturally changed the density of lifeforms in other places. In the end, it crossed the dangerous boundary. As this boundary was broken, a fierce battle broke out between the living beings of the star realm. The fierce battle began with Luo Fan as the center and began to spread in all directions. Many lifeforms seemed to be irreconcilable with each other. Their power erupted, laws were stirred, and endless terrifying power was constantly surging. Although the corpse of this star lifeform was extremely powerful, it was still a dead object after all. Under the impact of the power of so many lifeforms, it began to shake. Feeling the shaking of the huge lifeform under his feet, Luo Fan couldn't help but frown. He originally chose this place because it could bring him peace and prevent him from being affected by other lifeforms. He didn't expect that after coming here, he wouldn't be able to have peace either. At this moment, he snorted coldly. An imposing aura that had slaughtered countless star lifeforms leaked out from his body and poured into the mountain under his feet. Then, it poured into the huge tortoise, causing the tortoise to be filled with an incomparably powerful killing intent. From the inside out, it began to envelop all the star lifeforms that existed on it. It was incomparably tragic. The incomparably bloody aura formed a fundamental suppression for the star lifeforms. Under this suppression, how could the star lifeforms that were originally fighting each other pay attention to the other star lifeforms? Each and every one of them had a feeling that they were going to be completely crushed in the next moment and had no chance of reincarnation. For a moment, they panicked and began to quickly escape from the source of the bloody aura, which was the huge tortoise under their feet. In just a few dozen breaths of time, there were no longer any starry sky life forms left, and the star life forms could no longer retain their original killing intent due to the suppression of this terrifying aura. Instead, they all tried their best to distance themselves from the corpse of the star life form. During this process, the distance between them gradually increased. When they were no longer suppressed by the powerful aura exuding from the tortoise, the distance between them had also returned to a safe boundary. The killing between them finally stopped. Seeing this scene, Luo Fan retracted his aura and thought to himself, "It's finally quiet." With a thought, he instantly input all kinds of parameters into the decomposition and transformation law. In an instant, the laws around the tortoise began to change, and the chaos on it gradually calmed down. In the blink of an eye, the entire tortoise had become independent of the entire star lifeforms. In the blink of an eye, he had completely disappeared from the senses of all the lifeforms in the starry sky, just like Luo Fan and the many bloodline crystals in his hand. This could be considered as completely eliminating all worries of being disturbed. Sensing the changes in the star lifeform, Luo Fan nodded and no longer paid attention to it. If there were still creatures that could collide with him, then he would accept it. The countless blood-colored crystal balls suddenly exploded at this moment. The bloodlines began to break down and converge in front of him. Gradually, the original countless crystal balls converged into a huge river, slowly flowing around him. The countless bloodlines in this river were incompatible with each other. At this moment, even though they were gathered in one place, they were still distinct from each other. As they flowed, they clashed with each other. Crackling sounds came from the long river, as if there were countless thunderbolts in the long river that were ready to explode at any moment. In this process, the bloodlines began to adjust to each other. Those who were incompatible with each other gradually distanced themselves from each other, and those who were compatible with each other began to get closer to each other. In this way, in just a few days, the sounds that erupted from the various conflicts in the river gradually subsided, and the entire river seemed to have become inexplicably stable. This stability caused the long river to divide into many levels. The original chaos became orderly, and the countless bloodlines seemed to have reconstructed an ecological balance system. They all found their own positions in the long river. At this time, Luo Fan began to open his eyes. His perception seeped into the river with the support of his law power, comprehending and studying every strand of bloodline in the river. However, he had intentionally allowed the rivers to adjust their positions on their own. Only this kind of adjustment could allow the bloodlines to gather together according to their own affinity, and also allow Luo Fan to grasp the roots of these bloodlines through his understanding of similar bloodlines, find the essence of these bloodlines, and grasp the secret of how these creatures could live and move freely in the starry sky. Countless chaotic laws continuously seeped out of the river at this time. Because the conflicts between the bloodlines had already been adjusted to the minimum level, the chaotic laws that seeped out of the river were almost like a whole, and the resonance between them and the chaotic laws in the outside world also became unprecedentedly strong. In fact, in order to ensure that the tortoise continued to be out of the sight of all the other creatures in the starry sky, Luo Fan was actually constantly adjusting the laws around the tortoise. In other words, He was adjusting the parameters of the decomposition and transformation law that he had entered. If it wasn't for the fact that he was constantly adjusting himself, the chaotic laws and laws in his bloodline would have broken everything. All of his means would have failed. But even so, at this time, Luo Fan gradually felt a little powerless. The resonance was just too strong. It could be said that there were trillions of changes in the laws around the river at every moment. He had to adjust the trillions of parameters at every moment in order to maintain this state. Under such circumstances, his study of the bloodline river was increasingly affected. As a result, the longer he studied the bloodline river, the harder it was to produce results. Looks like I can't continue like this. Luo Fan's heart trembled. Such a thought gradually emerged in his mind. With this thought in mind, he no longer hesitated. He instantly stopped disintegrating and transforming the laws of nature and released his control over the laws of nature around the tortoise, causing the laws of nature around the tortoise to return to their original state of absolute chaos. At this moment, a huge uproar broke out among the surrounding creatures in the starry sky. Some powerful creatures in the distance began to roar, as if they felt an incomparably great threat. The roars mixed together, colliding with each other and affecting each other. It was as if the originally calm starry sky had turned into a wild and primitive land. The reason for this situation was very simple. The bloodline river was no longer under any restrictions, interacting with the laws around it. As a result, many powerful creatures in the starry sky could sense it. An incomparably powerful creature had suddenly appeared here. Coupled with the existence of the giant tortoise's corpse, many living beings instinctively sensed that the giant tortoise had suddenly come back to life, and it had come back to life in a state that was many times more powerful than before. Under such circumstances, the originally balanced ecosystem in the vicinity was naturally challenged. It was only natural that many living beings in the starry sky would have such a reaction. Luo Fan could sense all of this in his heart, but he could only sigh. Even if he knew about this situation, even though he had hidden this bloodline river, he couldn't completely erase it. The impact had already been caused, and the commotion would continue for a long time. It might even take an extremely long time for it to completely calm down. With this understanding, he was too lazy to care about the changes in his surroundings. He just activated his sensing ability and began to work hard to sense every bloodline in this long river of bloodlines. He sensed the interactions between these bloodlines and the other bloodlines. He sensed the changes in the countless laws that were revealed by these bloodlines, and he sensed the interactions between these laws and the chaotic laws in the surroundings. This contained the fundamental secrets of the starry sky creatures, as well as the secrets of this starry sky. As he sensed, Luo Fan seemed to see a boundless starry sky develop from nothing, and he gradually grasped some kind of order within the chaos. Under such circumstances, he gradually became engrossed in it. Everything in the outside world gradually faded away from him. The chaos in the surrounding starry sky continued. This chaos was getting more and more intense, and it seemed to be gathering towards the huge tortoise. Soon, a powerful starry sky creature arrived in this area and confronted the huge tortoise. The starry sky creature was a long snake with a dozen heads, and it looked extremely ugly. Although it was much smaller than the giant tortoise in front of it, it was still on the same level. The two of them were facing each other, and it looked like two worlds were confronting each other. The momentum was so great that it shook the heavens and the earth. The long snake with a dozen heads was filled with doubt. Because no matter which eye it had, it could only see that the huge tortoise in front of it was a corpse, and a corpse that had no value at all. Originally, it would have been disdainful of such a corpse. However, at this moment, it clearly felt a strong threat from this corpse. This feeling was simply as strange as a person looking at a stone statue and feeling that the stone statue could jump up and stab him at any time. However, this creature wasn't a creature with much intelligence, after all. It mostly relied on its instincts to deal with everything. It couldn't figure it out at this moment, but it couldn't be bothered to think about it. As the heads roared, it pounced forward and began to tear the huge tortoise apart. Neither the huge tortoise nor Luo Fan, who was behind it, had any reaction to its tearing. Chapter 1994. Under the fluctuation of the Bloodline River, the giant tortoise that had been dead for an unknown period of time and had even turned into a fossil suddenly regained a little vitality. Its originally lifeless body suddenly began to move. Wisps of powerful fluctuations began to seep out of the giant tortoise's body. Under these fluctuations, the tortoise's completely transformed appearance began to gradually change. Unknowingly, it had already returned to the original appearance of a normal tortoise. A sound akin to the surging of a great river began to leak out of its body, causing the 10-headed snake to feel an unimaginable threat coming from the giant tortoise. At this moment, the giant snake began to retreat rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had already retreated tens of thousands of miles away. It could only watch from afar as the giant tortoise gradually woke up from its sleep and began to move. Roars were constantly emitted from the dozen heads of the long snake. Every roar represented a warning and anger. It seemed like the snake was questioning why the tortoise would appear in its territory, but it also seemed like it was telling the tortoise to leave quickly. However, it was clear that this kind of question could not be answered. After all, the tortoise was already dead. The reason why there was such a change at this time was that it looked like it had woken up from a deep slumber, but it was only because its bloodline that had completely dried up was stimulated by the river of bloodline and was being reproduced. In other words, although the giant tortoise looked alive, it was in fact a puppet that was being controlled. It didn't even have any instincts, let alone participate in a battle. However, obviously, to the snake, the tortoise's behavior was not giving it any face. It completely disregarded its identity as the absolute ruler of this area. Under such circumstances, how angry would the snake be? One could imagine. It could be said that the tortoise had gradually turned into an irreconcilable enemy to the current him. Under such circumstances, the tortoise suddenly raised its head to the sky and roared. This roar was incomparably loud and clear. In fact, it felt even more majestic and valiant than when it was alive. Under that voice, the surrounding laws began to stir wildly. It felt like everything was under the control of this voice. The surroundings seemed to have completely turned into this tortoise's domain, becoming the tortoise's world. At this moment, the huge snake felt an indescribable fear from its instincts. At that moment, how could he still remember the hatred he had for the tortoise? However, the only thing he felt was fear towards the tortoise. As he screamed, he turned around and left. Not long after, he disappeared without a trace, to the point where he couldn't see the tortoise at all. In the process, if there were any powerful starry sky life forms in the area it passed through, it would naturally kill them. I won't do it anymore. He didn't care about the many living beings around him, and he just continued on his way. For a starry sky creature that relied on instinct to control everything, everything else was secondary. Only one's own life was the most important. When it felt that its life was in danger, the starry sky life form could abandon all principles. After the huge snake left, the tortoise seemed to have lost its stimulation. Its originally recovered body began to gradually lose its vitality, and the roar that sounded like a raging river also gradually subsided. However, the appearance that had changed had already been fixed, and it couldn't restore the wonderful scenery that had formed in the starry sky for countless years. At this moment, he seemed to be all alone. It looked like a corpse. At this moment, due to the stimulation of the long snake, the Bloodline River began to move. As a result, the Bloodline River that caused the tortoise to change gradually returned to normal. All of these changes were seen by Luo Fan. His eyes shone with an even deeper understanding. The power of the Bloodline River was even more miraculous than he had imagined. The ripples it gave off were even more mysterious than he had imagined. Just by relying on this bloodline connection, It was able to revive this body that had been dead for who knows how many years, and even use the chaotic laws of the starry sky to drive this body, creating the illusion that this body had been resurrected and even strengthened. This bloodline of the starry sky creatures was probably even more important than he had imagined. Countless mysteries, countless truths, and endless information kept appearing in Luo Fan's heart. All kinds of mysteries about the bloodline were extracted from the endless information and spread out bit by bit. Gradually, he began to reconstruct a faintly discernible, seemingly without any power, but with a very unique characteristic of the origin. This long blood-colored river was none other than what he had comprehended, the foundation of the starry sky creature's bloodline. In other words, after completely eliminating all appearances and illusions, and completely eliminating all the differences of the starry sky creature, the last bit of the bloodline that was common to countless starry sky creatures, the reason why the bloodline was still so blurry and faintly discernible was very simple. Because at this time, his refinement had not reached the end. In other words, it was still not the essence, not close to the origin. This could actually be seen from its appearance. If it was really the origin of the bloodline, the essence of the bloodline, how could it look like this long river? If it was really the essence, the origin, then it must be a strand of the root of the bloodline, a tiny strand. Luo Fan could not be more clear about this. At this moment, he didn't stop. He was wholeheartedly comprehending the bloodline, feeling the powerful ripples of laws contained in the bloodline. He was trying his best to find the source of these laws, to find the root of all these changes. In the process of his continuous search, time passed bit by bit. In a trance, dozens of years passed just like that. And in these dozens of years, every single moment of every single moment, Luo Fan's understanding of the bloodline deepened. The compression and refinement of the long river of bloodline that existed in his heart was constantly strengthening. Until now, the long river of blood in his heart had been compressed to the size of a thumb. The impurities in it had almost been completely expelled, and everything that did not belong to the bloodline had been completely removed. Now, the long river of bloodline could no longer be called a long river, but a bloodline, and compared to the illusory appearance, the current bloodline had become extremely solid. It felt like it was no longer a phantom that was born from his heart, but a real bloodline that could even give birth to a real life. This feeling was so obvious that Luo Fan didn't even have the slightest bit of doubt in his heart. It's the last moment. Suddenly, at a certain moment, this thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. He sensed that the condensation of this bloodline had already reached the end. Next, soon, the bloodline was completely solidifying, and all of the impurities and secrets within it would be completely revealed in the blink of an eye. A premonition in his heart told him that there would be an earth-shattering change. Regarding this premonition in his heart, Luo Fan did not have the slightest doubt. After all, to him, in this universe, if even he did not believe in it himself, then there was nothing else that he could believe in. Even if it was a very ridiculous premonition, he absolutely believed in it. The reason was very simple. Because what he pursued was to use his own body to resist the state of chaos and control it. In order to obtain supreme divine abilities and supreme power, and to use his own body to resist and control the state of chaos, he must raise everything in his body to the extent that even the state of chaos could not be shaken. Under such circumstances, if he did not have enough faith in himself and believed that other things could surpass him, then what was the point of using his own body to resist the state of chaos? Couldn't he just use the things that he believed in to resist it? With this understanding, Luo Fan did not hesitate to use his law power and use the unique space-time dimension that he controlled to completely protect himself. Although he had been studying the long river of bloodlines all these years, in fact, in the process of studying it, he had not only gained an understanding of the bloodline of the starry sky lifeforms, but also gained an extremely deep understanding of the time, space, laws, and all other changes caused by the bloodline. And this naturally had a negative effect on his worldview. And this in turn affected all the powers that he controlled, including the independent space-time dimension that he controlled. As a result, the unique space-time dimension that he displayed had changed a lot compared to before. It felt even more mysterious, and the background of the sphere also seemed to be a little brighter. At this moment, the bloodline that appeared in his heart suddenly trembled. Then, it instantly broke away from his control and began to release an indescribably terrifying power that impacted his mind and body. Through these various impacts, it even began to stir the laws around him, causing the unique space-time dimension that Luo Fan constructed to shake violently at this moment. This bloodline has turned illusory into reality and is being controlled by some kind of will. At this moment, Luo Fan had already figured out what was going on. As he figured it out, his expression became extremely unsightly. At this moment, rays of light appeared in the depths of his heart. In the blink of an eye, the materialization of the world of laws condensed in the depths of his heart. The world of laws had already wrapped around the bloodline and began to prevent the bloodline from tormenting his heart, preventing the bloodline from triggering everything in the outside world to affect him. Fortunately, this was his heart, after all, and his ability to control it had reached an unimaginable level. Even the terrifying will that he didn't know where it was and how strong it was couldn't suppress his control at this moment. At this moment, everything was sealed within the worldview. All of them were sealed within the world of laws. Even though they created a boundless and terrifying commotion within the world of laws, they were unable to spread out in the end. It couldn't affect the outside world. Along with this change, at this moment, the chaotic laws in the surroundings began to fluctuate inexplicably. There seemed to be a huge hand reaching out from nowhere and starting to stir the surrounding laws. Even the huge tortoise under Luo Fan gradually began to vibrate at this moment, as if it wanted to cross the boundary of death and come back again. This time, the vibration of the tortoise was completely different from the vibration caused by the river of bloodlines back then. Back then, it was only the influence of the fluctuations of the bloodline itself, and the source was the river of bloodlines. But now, it was a kind of vibration that was produced from the depths of the tortoise's body. This vibration represented a kind of vitality that was produced from the depths of the body. This meant that the tortoise was gradually coming back to life. Even the dead tortoise had undergone such a huge change. At this moment, the river of bloodlines that was bound by Luo Fan also began to change drastically. This river of bloodlines was originally revolving around Luo Fan's body, but at this moment its head and tail suddenly broke off, and the entire river turned into a blood-colored divine dragon. The horns on its head were protruding, and it began to stretch out its claws, clawing fiercely at Luo Fan. And in the distance, there seemed to be all kinds of terrifying power rapidly gathering here, and the feeling of an impending storm was extremely obvious at this moment. With this change, the countless starry sky creatures in the surroundings began to hide far away, trying their best to stay as far away from where the tortoise was, as if the end of the world was about to erupt. At this moment, Luo Fan snorted coldly, "I'm not a starry sky creature under your command." With this cold snort, he brazenly made a move, and the power of laws on his body rushed out of his body. In a flash, it turned into a giant axe. In the blink of an eye, it had directly cut open the divine dragon formed by the river of bloodlines. After it was cut open, the blood-colored divine dragon was still struggling, trying hard to reverse its fate of destruction, reform, and continue to fight with Luo Fan. However, it was a pity that Luo Fan's axe wasn't just a simple chop. It contained the mysteries of destruction, and the concept of annihilation had already reached the conceptual level. No matter how the bloodline divine dragon struggled, it couldn't resist it. In the end, everything of the bloodline divine dragon collapsed in an instant. All the bloodlines were completely destroyed, and in the end, only traces of blood were left, gradually spreading in all directions. At this moment, the giant tortoise under Luo Fan suddenly roared at the sky, and an endless suction force appeared in its mouth, crazily devouring the dissipating bloodline power. In the blink of an eye, a huge vortex appeared in its mouth. Countless blood-colored lights began to rapidly gather in the vortex, constantly fusing into the tortoise's body. The tortoise's vitality, which was just a little bit away from being fully activated, was suddenly fully activated. An incomparably powerful force was released from the tortoise's body and rushed in all directions, directly turning the surroundings into layers of earth. Layer by layer, the momentum was simply like another way of creating the world. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan was buried in the ground in an instant. Boundless and terrifying power continued to push against him, forming an increasingly powerful suppression on him. Even with the protection of the space-time dimension, he felt somewhat powerless. Creaking sounds continuously rang out from his space-time dimension. Faced with such changes, Luo Fan frowned. The giant tortoise itself was not so powerful. At least, it was not so powerful when it was alive. Based on his research on the bloodline of the star realm lifeforms over the years, this tortoise itself was only equivalent to the Supreme Emperor level. Although it was already so powerful that it made people despair compared to ordinary cultivators or even false saints, to him, it was just a matter of a slap. And at this moment, the power it displayed was already so powerful that it had even become a threat to him, making him strongly feel that if he did not use any means, he would be in danger. Faced with such a situation, he did not dare to be careless anymore. On the conceptual level, his concept of existence swayed slightly and collided with the huge concept of existence beside him. This huge concept of existence was none other than the concept of existence of this giant tortoise. Although the tortoise itself had come back to life, it had been dead for such a long time. At this time, even if there was a powerful force surging to resurrect it, on the conceptual level, it would not be able to completely return to the state of a living creature so quickly. In other words, from the perspective of its concept of existence, it was still the corpse of that tortoise. This was something that even the terrifying will that was unknown could not change. Chapter 1995. At this moment, his powerful concept of existence completely crushed the concept of existence of the huge creature around him. The strength of the concept of existence itself was extremely weak compared to his power. During this process, he didn't even feel that his concept of existence had suffered much impact. There was only an inexplicable numbness coming from the concept of existence. As the concept of existence was completely crushed, Luo Fan felt an indescribable sense of relief. The huge tortoise below had completely collapsed in an instant, as if it had never appeared. There wasn't even the slightest trace left in this starry sky. As this happened, the terrifying power that was constantly gathering from all directions suddenly paused, as if time had suddenly stopped. This situation was so strange that it felt like an indescribable switch had suddenly turned everything off. However, in the face of this situation, Luo Fan didn't show any joy. There was only solemnity, because at this moment, he suddenly felt that the bloodline in his heart was still constantly shaking and growing, bringing him more and more pressure. It even faintly affected the stability of the world of laws that he had condensed, causing it to shake violently at this moment. Such a scene. Clearly, it meant that the consciousness still hadn't relaxed its control over him. It still wanted to strangle him. Faced with this situation, Luo Fan only had vigilance in his heart. His magic power of laws began to surge and flow rapidly at this moment. Vaguely, there was a powerful and unparalleled power constantly being released. It even made him feel that his concept of existence was under an inexplicable pressure, and he faintly felt like it was about to collapse. This situation, how serious it was. This could be seen from how his concept of existence easily crushed the concept of existence of the huge tortoise. What kind of existence is it? Such a thought flashed through his mind. With this thought in mind, his heart moved slightly. A powerful magic power of laws flowed into his heart and suddenly pushed the bloodline that was wrapped by the world of laws. In the blink of an eye, a mysterious power was produced from this push. His world view and his bloodline suddenly spun under this mysterious power. It had already spun out of his mind, and then spun out of his body. It directly appeared outside his body. At this moment, he suddenly felt an indescribable blood-red color instantly fill his eyes. Under this blood-red color, there was an indescribable power suppressing him all over his body. Under this pressure, he felt a faint stabbing pain all over his body. The chaotic laws in the surroundings seemed to have completely changed at this moment. It was as if all the chaos was controlled by an indescribable power and began to crazily attack and stir. It formed a powerful crushing pressure on him, causing him to feel his strength gradually dissipating. Die. In a trance, he seemed to hear such a voice being born from the surrounding power and beginning to crush him. In the face of such a voice, Luo Fan only had an indescribable expression on his face. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the source of the red light. At this moment, he saw a red vortex appear at the source. And at the center of the red vortex was none other than the bloodline that he had spent so much time refining, the bloodline that had appeared in his heart. The current state of this bloodline was like the body of a living being in the starry sky. It was inside the vortex, controlling and supporting everything in the vortex. From afar, this vortex looked like a huge eye that was quietly staring at Luo Fan. The endless chaotic laws and laws in the surroundings were controlled by this huge eye. This is the greater consciousness? At this moment, Luo Fan already understood what his opponent was. Originally, he had vaguely sensed this through the balance between the many living beings in the starry sky. However, he had always felt that this matter had nothing to do with him, so he didn't pay much attention to it. But he didn't expect that the greater consciousness had already appeared in front of him after he had condensed a strand of the bloodline that belonged to the starry sky. From the looks of it, it wanted to fight him. Is there a need for that? Luo Fan could only smile bitterly at this moment. After understanding his opponent, he knew that he couldn't hold back anymore. With a thought, the power of the half-step soul treasure was activated. Waves of mysterious light suddenly enveloped his entire body, and in the blink of an eye, he had already isolated all the laws and laws of the outside world. In an instant, crackling sounds came from the mysterious light of the half-step spirit treasure around his body. Obviously, the powerful crushing force hadn't completely disappeared, but was only received by the light of the spirit treasure. In the face of such a situation, there was only an inexplicable solemnity in Luo Fan's expression at this moment. He didn't expect that even the power of the half-step spirit treasure would faintly be unable to withstand the powerful force of the blood-colored vortex at this moment. Looking at the appearance of the blood-colored vortex, he suddenly felt that it seemed to be very similar to the will of heaven and earth. At this moment, the blood-colored vortex suddenly twisted. As it twisted, an incomparably powerful force suddenly erupted from it. In an instant, Luo Fan felt that the laws around him had suddenly undergone a drastic change. The light of his half-step primordial origin treasure seemed to have met its natural enemy and suddenly began to gradually dissipate. What a powerful technique! This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. With this thought, the law energy within his body began to change rapidly. Gradually, the law energy began to change. Gradually, it simulated a mysterious bloodline that directly changed his body. It made him vaguely exude an aura that belonged to a starry sky creature. With this aura, his body faintly revealed all kinds of chaotic laws. This chaotic law and the chaotic laws in the surrounding starry sky produced an inexplicable resonance, making the surrounding chaos no longer a threat to him. On the contrary, it formed an inexplicable help. It made him faintly feel like a fish in water in this starry sky. With this change, the crushing force that his half-step spirit treasure's light was withstood suddenly reduced a lot. The crackling sounds coming from the surrounding light also became much softer. At this moment, in the face of such a situation, Luo Fan no longer hesitated. His figure flashed, and he brazenly rushed towards the huge vortex. In a flash, his figure had already arrived at the edge of the vortex. For a moment, an incomparably powerful force broke out from the blood-colored vortex. Like a surging wave, it rushed out in all directions, and a terrifying impact rolled towards Luo Fan. Wave after wave impacted his body, impacting his existence. At this moment, Luo Fan felt that the crackling sound around his body became more and more intense. Now, he was using the power of the half-step spirit treasure, but he was using the immortal essence of the half-step spirit treasure to resist all the attacks from the outside world. It was also because of this nearly indestructible essence that he was able to remain unscathed under the impact of the great consciousness. It was also why he could continue to move towards the vortex at this moment, instead of being crushed by the impact and having all traces of his existence erased. Under such a terrifying attack, Luo Fan's figure twisted and his body constantly shone with spiritual light, like a constantly twinkling star in the starry sky. This kind of light penetrated far and wide. It even made people suspect that this kind of light existed even in the Tao Master Great World. If there was a creature that didn't understand the essence of the starry sky, it might even think that there was another star in the sky. There's actually a cultivator in the starry sky that triggered the will of the starry sky? Whose disciple is this? How could he be so reckless? At this moment, somewhere in the Tao Master Great World, a cultivator looked up at the starry sky and murmured. This cultivator was in a holy land for cultivation. The world's origin energy was ordinary, but the laws of the world were intertwined in an extremely strange way. All kinds of indescribable forms appeared around this holy land, allowing any creature to easily find the laws they could comprehend here, and then achieve the goal of comprehending the laws of the world. To be able to trigger my sudden inspiration, it seems that this person has some connection with me. Fine, I'll help you. This cultivator had the appearance of an old man. He looked at the constantly twinkling light in the starry sky and continued to murmur. He was an independent cultivator, but he wasn't an ordinary one. He wasn't much weaker than the disciples of a Tao Master. In fact, many of the disciples of a Tao Master were even weaker than him. In terms of strength at this time, he was even stronger than Luo Fan by 30%. Although this kind of independent cultivator still wasn't as powerful as the disciples of a Tao Master, he was still a feudal lord and could occupy an area in the Tao Master Great World and call himself a king. The old man took out a bronze mirror from his bosom. This bronze mirror looked extremely simple, as if it had been buried in the soil for an unknown number of years before being dug up again. After taking out the bronze mirror, the old man stroked it and sighed. A mysterious power was generated from the surrounding void and quickly poured into the bronze mirror, causing it to instantly emit an indescribable light. This light constantly expanded and contracted on the bronze mirror. It seemed to be condensing and refining, ready to break out of the mirror and head into the depths of the starry sky at any moment. At this moment, the constantly twinkling light in the starry sky suddenly shook and suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if it had never been there. This change made the old man's expression change. What's going on? Is that cultivator finished? Such a thought flashed through his mind. With this thought in mind, the ray of light in his copper mirror suddenly changed and turned into another form. In an instant, it shot into the sky, and in the blink of an eye, it had already pierced through space-time and arrived in the depths of the starry sky. It brazenly shone on the spot where the starlight was. As the light reached its target, the scene in that spot appeared on the bronze mirror. It made the old man feel as if he was looking at the starry sky with his own eyes. He directly saw everything that happened there through the bronze mirror. At this moment, he saw a young cultivator quietly floating in the void. The blood-colored light around him had completely shattered, and the blood-colored fragments began to float in all directions. With a single glance, it was clear that a battle had just taken place, and it was this cultivator who won. Who's spying? At this moment, the cultivator suddenly narrowed his eyes and looked toward the light. His gaze seemed to pierce through space-time and directly see the old man and the bronze mirror. So powerful! Such a thought flashed through the old man's mind. This cultivator was actually not much weaker than him. Moreover, compared to his cultivation base, the threat he posed was countless times stronger than his cultivation base. It was as if even if the old man's cultivation was similar to the cultivator's, he would not be able to resist at all. As the cultivator let out a roar, the light around him condensed and an indescribable pressure passed through time and space and acted on the old man's body. After all, the old man was not a weakling. At this moment, he chuckled and the world trembled slightly. The pressure was completely eliminated, allowing the old man to relax. After all, this was a large world, and the laws here were the laws of the large world. The old man had cultivated here for hundreds of millions of years, and he had already established a connection with this holy land of cultivation through various means. Borrowing the power of this holy land of cultivation to fight his enemies was almost instinctive to him. Therefore, at this moment, he was able to eliminate Luo Fan's aura so easily. However, this impact allowed Luo Fan to instantly grasp the old man's location and even clearly sense the scene on the old man's side. That's right, that cultivator was Luo Fan. Just now, when he crashed into the blood-colored vortex, he naturally endured an indescribably terrifying pressure. He almost couldn't withstand it and completely collapsed. However, after he charged into the vortex, the situation underwent a tremendous change. The pressure that he had to endure had been greatly reduced. It was like a huge tornado, and the calmest place was the center. It was the same for this vortex. The inside was calmer than the outside, and the pressure was also lesser. Under such circumstances, he naturally did not hesitate to erupt with all of his power and directly attack the bloodline that had stepped out of his heart. Under the combined impact of the boundless dermic power of law, the innate inextinguishable spiritual light, and even the spiritual light of a half-step spiritual treasure, the bloodline simply collapsed. After all, it was only a bloodline that was born from his spirit. Although it possessed indescribable mysteries and unimaginable power due to its extremely high nature, the nature of the spirit didn't change, and its fragility wouldn't change. Under Luo Fan's various attacks, that bit of bloodline eventually melted like ice and snow under the sun in the blink of an eye. As it melted, the surrounding blood-colored vortex also gradually collapsed. The pressure that was exerting on the light emitted by the half-step primordial origin spiritual treasure around Luo Fan naturally disappeared. This was also the fundamental reason why the light suddenly disappeared when the old man was about to make a move. Fortunately, it's only a projection in my heart, so it can't withstand the consciousness. Otherwise, I'm afraid it won't be so easy to deal with. This was what Luo Fan thought the moment the spirit bloodline projection was destroyed. In fact, this was indeed the case. The greater consciousness was the will of the starry sky. This level of will was similar to the will of the world, and it was an incomparably grand and vast existence. Such an existence, even if it was just a trace, contained unimaginable pressure. If it was a true starry sky bloodline, it would naturally be able to withstand the descent of this will, and it would be able to manifest more of its power. However, the bloodline just now was only a message. It was an existence similar to a projection condensed from Luo Fan's understanding of the essence of the starry sky bloodline. Although the message came from the starry sky, it had nothing to do with the starry sky at all. It completely came from Luo Fan himself. In this way, it, which could only use its own essence to withstand the pressure of the starry sky's will, was naturally unable to withstand it. To be able to exert such an effect in a short period of time and almost wipe out Luo Fan, this was already the essence of the bloodline projection being strong enough. How could it withstand such a strong impact? In the end, under the impact of Luo Fan's power, it melted like snow. Since fellow Taoist has already escaped, then I won't disturb you any further. At this moment, the old man only smiled and said. With the help of the copper mirror, this voice was instantly transmitted to where Luo Fan was, allowing him to clearly hear this voice. The moment he heard this voice, Luo Fan's expression changed. This was because he had never heard this voice before, but for some reason, he felt that this voice was quite familiar. P.S. Chapter 1996. Luo Fan only felt that there seemed to be some kind of indescribable karma between him and the old man. At this moment, the old man's eyes flickered slightly, and it was obvious that he was worried about something. Seeing his reaction, the old man smiled and said, "It seems that fellow Taoist also felt something. In that case, I won't say anything more. Let's talk about it in the future." Luo Fan also knew that the old man's feeling was probably similar to his. Moreover, the old man might have even gone one step further. Not only did he sense the existence of karma between them, but he also felt that this karma should be good. Otherwise, he wouldn't have helped just now. He just sighed and said, "Then let's talk about it in the future." The old man smiled and bowed to Luo Fan before dispersing the power of the copper mirror. In an instant, the feeling of being watched completely disappeared, as if it had never existed. At this moment, whistling sounds came from the surroundings. The whistling sounds were so intense that they contained some kind of extremely terrifying power. It made Luo Fan feel an inexplicable sense of danger from the whistling sounds around him. At this moment, he knew that the will of the starry sky had not given up. "I have to leave this starry sky as soon as possible." At this moment, Luo Fan had already made up his mind. With this decision, he no longer hesitated and activated the starry sky bloodline that he had simulated with the power of laws. His figure flashed and disappeared on the spot. In another flash, his figure had already arrived in a starry sky that was countless light years away from where he was originally. When he turned around to look at where he was originally, he could no longer see it. The speed of light was no longer the same in this vast universe as it was on Earth. Moreover, the speed of light was no longer the absolute speed of this vast universe. Therefore, even if they were hundreds of millions of light years apart, Luo Fan could still see the scene in that location with a single glance, and there was no delay in time. In other words, he would not be able to see the scene in that location from who knows how many billions of years ago, of course. This could not be explained by the uniqueness of the speed of light. Perhaps it was due to the uniqueness of the starry sky. That was why such a situation had occurred. However, the entire starry sky was under the control of the will of the starry sky. At this moment, whistling sounds could still be heard from the surroundings. Moreover, the whistling sound was even closer than before. It was as if it completely ignored the distance he had left and was always by his side. Faced with such a situation, Luo Fan did not dare to be careless. He once again stimulated the simulated bloodline, and with the help of the boundless chaotic laws, he flashed. He had already disappeared from his original spot. When he reappeared, he was billions of light years away. However, compared to before, the whistling sound was even louder. It's a pity that this isn't a normal law. I can't perfectly control it. If it's a normal rule, there's no need to go through this process. I can reach my destination directly. Luo Fan sighed in his heart and disappeared again. The reason why he could teleport in this starry sky was because of his simulated bloodline. Because of this kind of teleportation was greatly restricted, making it impossible for him to perfectly control it. Because of this, just now, he could only teleport and jump as if he was using an ability that he couldn't control himself. In this manner, after tens of thousands of teleportations, the whistling sound had already reached his side. Vaguely, the boundless chaotic laws had already opened their mouths around him, wanting to swallow him completely. Mince. In the eyes of the outside world, this situation, a huge whirlpool appeared around his body, and it was constantly compressing. It was constantly condensing, trying to mince him in the center. However, at this moment, Luo Fan relaxed and a faint smile appeared on his face. Because his destination was right in front of him. He had finally escaped the attack of the will of the starry sky at the last moment. With a thought, he lifted his foot and took a light step forward. His figure had already crossed the vortex and crashed into a star. In the blink of an eye, light and shadow flickered around him. Countless laws and laws frantically changed and streaked across. In the blink of an eye, he had already passed through the invisible barrier and stepped into an incomparably harmonious and complicated world. A feeling that was completely different from the starry sky made his face light up with satisfaction. This is the real world. An indescribable feeling emerged in his heart. After getting used to the perfect world, he felt like a fish coming to land from the sea. He felt all kinds of discomfort all over his body. He wished he could immediately leave this world and return to the perfect world. However, after sensing the chaos in this starry sky, feeling the countless laws and laws entangling with each other, and the hostility of the will of the starry sky, he once again felt the laws and laws in this world that he could not control. He found that everything was so wonderful and so pleasant. Where was the feeling of a fish coming to land? It seems that I am also an ordinary person. Realizing the change in his mentality, Luo Fan could not help but smile bitterly. His state of mind was not much different from that of an ordinary being. For an ordinary being, after staying in an extremely painful situation for a period of time, returning to a place that was still painful but slightly better than before would make them feel incomparably satisfied. Just like him now, after returning to the great Tao Master world, his heart trembled and his expression changed greatly. This is 30 million years ago? This thought flashed through his mind and his eyes were filled with disbelief. For the current Luo Fan, he would instinctively know all kinds of things about time when he entered any world, even if it was a great world. For example, how much time had passed compared to the last time he came here? For example, how much time had passed compared to the last time? Was it the past or the future? This was the instinctive feeling of a powerful creature, and did not even need to go through the laws and laws. Nor did it need to go through the great Tao of this world. But now, he felt it. The time in the great Tao Master world was even earlier than the time before he entered the Tao Master path. To be specific, it was 30 million years ago. The Tao Master path. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and the uncertainty in his eyes turned into shock. For this great world, all the space-time dimensions had been completely integrated into one. Past, present, future. It had completely converged from a scattered state. Under such circumstances, any cultivator, at least any cultivator that Luo Fan could understand, could not travel through space-time to the past, present, and future. It was even more impossible to enter a completely different reality, which was a different space-time dimension. Under such circumstances, the Tao Master's path was able to achieve this. Just how mysterious was the Tao Master's path? One could imagine. He could not help but be shocked. As for whether the great world in front of him was fake, or whether it was built by the Tao Master path, it was essentially just a simulation of the great world. But Luo Fan did not have the slightest doubt. There was no other reason, because the great world in front of him was the real great world. It contained everything that the great world had, and everything that the great world should contain. Moreover, even if he used all of his means, he still couldn't sense any signs of it being illusory. No matter how strong the Tao Master path was, it was impossible to create such a great world. Therefore, this could only be the great world from 30 million years ago. Everything here. It could only be the great world from 30 million years ago. At this moment, He recalled the time before he was about to enter the great world. He saw the ancient tree say, "I've seen you once." Thinking of this, his heart stirred. He raised his hand and a leaf appeared in his hand. He sensed that in a very distant place, there was something that resonated with the leaf. It was the ancient tree. This further proved what he had thought before. This was not a created world, nor was it an illusion, but the real world of the Tao Master from 30 million years ago. He had just crossed the boundary between the starry sky and the great world, and he was now above the sea of clouds. At a glance, it was a boundless sea of clouds, and he could even sense the presence of countless living beings. There were even some living creatures that made him feel an indescribable sense of threat, as if those living creatures could threaten his existence at all. The great world is indeed full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind as he sensed all of this. At this moment, a voice came into his ears. "Fellow, you have just returned from the starry sky. Did you gain anything? The heavenly dragon tribe is willing to trade with you." Then, the sea of clouds surged, and a faintly discernible divine dragon gradually emerged from the sea of clouds. This divine dragon was 100,000 feet long, and its aura grew stronger as it emerged. Its presence also became more and more obvious. It can actually divide itself into parts and then into parts again. This kind of life is very mysterious. Luo Fan couldn't help but admire this scene. He was completely sure that he had not missed anything. Before this divine dragon had appeared, there had not been any powerful aura below, let alone the aura of such a powerful cloud dragon. However, in the blink of an eye, this cloud dragon had appeared here, and the countless tiny auras below had completely disappeared. It felt as if the countless tiny auras had combined to form this huge cloud dragon. "I came back in a hurry and didn't gain anything. Let's forget about the trade," Luo Fan said lightly. "Why are you unwilling to trade? The heavenly dragon tribe controls the sea of clouds and has countless treasures. There must be something that you need. Why don't you take a look?" The cloud dragon said. Judging from its expression, it seemed to be chuckling. Luo Fan suddenly became interested. He suddenly remembered that this was no longer a perfect world, but a big world. In this world, there were all kinds of treasures that couldn't be found in a perfect world, and they might be useful to him. It was just like the painting he had obtained from the Hungry Wolf City Lord back then. However, after thinking about it, he shook his head and said, "Although it's very interesting, it's a pity. I didn't get anything from the starry sky to trade with your tribe." "You don't have to get it from the starry sky. Anything is fine," the divine dragon said. Luo Fan frowned slightly and said, "I'm sorry. I'm not interested anymore. Goodbye." As he spoke, he touched the rule of decomposition and transformation. The laws around him changed slightly, bringing him under the sea of clouds in a mysterious way. At this moment, he vaguely saw a red light in the cloud dragon's eyes. There was an inexplicable malice coming from it. At this moment, Luo Fan thought to himself and became extremely vigilant. The power of laws in his body surged continuously, and he was ready to pounce on the cloud dragon's attack at any time. However, the cloud dragon didn't know what was on its mind. Although its eyes were flickering with red light and its malice was already rushing towards Luo Fan, it didn't attack in the end. Instead, it sat and watched as Luo Fan completely disappeared above the sea of clouds, as if it had some scruples. This Taoist was actually able to come down from the sea of clouds safely? At this moment, a cry of surprise came from somewhere. The voice wasn't loud, and the place where the voice came from was quite far away. However, in Luo Fan's ears, the voice was so clear that it sounded like it was ringing in his ears. The voice was so clear that it sounded as if it was ringing in his ears. Seems like I should be able to get some information from him. At this moment, such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. At this moment, a large number of senses scanned the place where he was from all directions and discovered his existence. However, apart from the person who spoke, the other senses only flashed past in a flash. They didn't dare to linger around Luo Fan for too long. It was obvious that they felt that he wasn't someone to be trifled with and didn't want to cause unnecessary trouble. Only the person who spoke ignored Luo Fan's reaction. At this time, he was still staring at Luo Fan without flinching. It was as if he didn't think that it was impolite. With a thought, Luo Fan changed his direction. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at the place where the person who spoke was. This was a valley with an extremely beautiful environment. There were exotic flowers and plants, rare beasts, gorgeous buildings, and powerful defensive formations. One could tell at a glance that the people living here weren't ordinary people. At this moment, the defensive formation didn't open. There was only a young man standing on top of the gorgeous building in the middle of the valley. He was leisurely looking at Luo Fan, who was approaching him. Seeing this man, Luo Fan frowned slightly. This man's strength was actually at the Supreme Emperor level. His strength far surpassed the false sage level. Even if he wasn't considered strong compared to Luo Fan, he was definitely not considered weak even in this world. Fellow Taoist, you're a guest from afar. Why don't you come down and have a seat? The man smiled and said when he saw Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan's interest was piqued. Although he didn't fully display his strength at this moment, just the fact that he had completely restrained his aura that the other party couldn't sense was enough for him to recognize how powerful he was. Why did this person in front of him still dare to talk to him so leisurely at this moment? You're very interesting. Tell me, why did you bring me here? Luo Fan said indifferently. Hearing this, the man smiled and said, as expected, I can't hide it from you. I brought you here this time because I have a request. Oh? Would you casually invite a cultivator you can't see through just to ask him to do something? Luo Fan said with a smile. Of course not. I brought you here because I realized that you might be able to help me. If not for that, how would I dare to bring you here when I have a clear understanding of my own strength? The man sighed. Now that you've said that, I'm a little interested. Tell me, what do you want me to do, and what can you pay? Luo Fan said indifferently. At this moment, he had already seen through all the offensive and defensive methods in the valley. Not to mention the fact that he could use the decomposition and transformation laws to control the laws of this world. Even without these, he was confident that he wouldn't be affected just by relying on his own strength. Under such circumstances, he naturally didn't need to have any scruples. Immediately, he slowly landed in front of the man and looked at him quietly. At this moment, the man's expression was calm, but there was a hint of fear in the depths of his eyes. He seemed to have finally realized how powerful the cultivator that he had lured over was and how great of a threat it could bring to him. Forget it, let's not talk about this for now. You seem to have a good understanding of the Sky Dragon clan. Tell me, why was it so insistent on making a deal with me? Why was it so hostile when I wasn't willing? The man was about to speak, but Luo Fan interrupted him and asked directly. Hearing this, the man could only stop what he was about to say and explain the situation of the Sky Dragon clan to Luo Fan in detail. With his explanation, Luo Fan also gradually understood why the Sky Dragon clan behaved like that before. So that's the case. If I had known earlier, I would have taken action just now. Luo Fan sighed inwardly and said. It turned out that the deal with the Sky Dragon clan wasn't about the content of the deal, but the deal itself. Chapter 1997. The man just smiled and said, if you had fought just now, things would have been even more troublesome. The Heavenly Dragon clan may seem like a clan, but in fact, they are just creatures named Heavenly Dragons. They are just divided into countless creatures that are distributed in the Sea of Clouds. If fellow Taoist had fought just now, even if you had defeated the Cloud Dragon just now, the Sky Dragon would have gathered even more bodies and turned into even more powerful creatures to fight against fellow Taoist. At that time, no matter how powerful fellow Taoist is, It would have been endless. Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded in understanding. He turned his head to look at the sea of clouds above and faintly sensed the countless hidden auras. It seemed that there was an unconcealable connection between them. After thinking about it, he finally gave up on the idea of turning around and fighting the Cloud Dragon again. After all, although the Cloud Dragon had evil intentions, it did not cause much trouble for him. Under such circumstances, it was not a wise choice to rashly fight against a creature that could possibly threaten him. At that moment, he turned to the man and said, "Tell me, what are you going to pay and what do you want me to help you with?" When the man heard this, he waved his hand and an item appeared in his hand. It looked like an ordinary iron cube, only the size of a fist. It looked extremely simple and unadorned, as if it had been buried in the ground for hundreds of millions of years. Just by appearing here, it gave off an indescribable feeling of age. The feeling of time wasn't just a feeling. In fact, it had even affected the surrounding laws, causing the surrounding time to slightly distort, vaguely forming an illusory figure around the metal cube. What is this? Luo Fan's eyes flashed. This item could even affect the nomological laws of this Tao Master universe and the flow of time here. How extraordinary was this item? One could imagine. At this moment, he had already made up his mind. He must obtain this item. Seeing Luo Fan's performance, the man finally heaved a sigh of relief. In fact, he was also taking a risk before. Luo Fan was very likely to be much stronger than him. If the other party was a cruel and merciless person, he would have instantly snatched this treasure away upon seeing it. Then, he would have been able to completely erase himself. However, even though Luo Fan seemed to be extremely interested in this item, he still did not try to snatch it. This was enough to show that he was a person with principles. This transaction was very likely to succeed. "When I saw you, I had a feeling that only you could help me," the man said as he raised his hand and took out an item. After this item appeared, an indescribable aura of decay seeped out and directly contaminated the surrounding spacetime, causing an indescribable stench to be emitted. Even Luo Fan could faintly feel that the aura of decay was shaking his own aura, causing his own aura to be gradually contaminated with a trace of decay during this process. At this moment, he did not dare to be negligent. With a thought, his law power began to circulate. In an instant, it protected his entire body, completely isolating the decaying aura, causing the decaying aura to be unable to approach him at all. At this point, he focused his attention and looked towards the source of the decaying aura. It was a heart that was constantly beating and vaguely seemed to be inseparable from the concept of existence. And the existence that was inseparable from this heart was none other than the man in front of him. "Is this your heart?" Although Luo Fan was asking a question, but he said it with certainty. However, he was completely convinced that the heart in front of him was the man's heart. When the man heard this, he let out a bitter laugh. He said, "Exactly. This heart is my heart. Your conditions this time. Don't tell me you want me to help you repair this heart? If that's the case, you've overestimated me. The injury to this heart is not something I can repair," Luo Fan said indifferently. "The reason why my heart was injured is because of what I suffered on the Tao Master Path. Only the Tao Master Path has the ability to heal this injury. Naturally, I don't expect you to be able to heal it," the man said. Hearing this, Luo Fan suddenly understood. This made sense. Even if the other party changed their bodies or changed their spirit souls, they wouldn't be able to escape from this injury. Instead, they would continue to follow them. This kind of injury could only be inflicted by a true sage, apart from the endless possibilities of becoming a Tao Master. And obviously, if the one who caused this injury was a true saint, he would not still be alive. Therefore, the one who caused this injury was obviously the Tao Sovereign Path. "So, what do you want to do?" Luo Fan asked indifferently. The man's eyes flashed as he said, "I need you to help me enter the Tao Sovereign Path again. Enter the Tao sovereign path again? Is it that difficult? There are almost endless entrances to the Tao sovereign path in this world. Can't you just find one? Luo Fan asked with a frown. You may not know this, but in fact, there is only one way to leave the Tao sovereign path. That is, in the process of breaking through the Tao sovereign path, you will sometimes encounter some forks. Through those forks, you can leave the Tao sovereign path and return to the world that may have been a few years ago or a few years later. This was also the reason why living beings could leave the Tao Master's path, but they could not pass through it. Once you leave the Tao sovereign path in this way, it is equivalent to having the mark of the Tao sovereign path on you. If you want to enter the Tao sovereign path again, you can only enter from the original entrance. If you choose any other entrance, you will encounter a test that is tens of thousands of times more difficult than the test of the entire Tao sovereign path. So? The man said. Hearing this, Luo Fan's face showed a look of enlightenment. It was only now that he clearly understood why he could appear here, and also why there were so many legends about the Tao sovereign path in this world, and why so many cultivators could return to this world even though they did not pass through the Tao sovereign path. With your ability, even if you are injured, there shouldn't be any entrance that can stop you. There shouldn't be any entrance that can block it. Why do you still need my help? Luo Fan asked again. At this time, the man had already stuffed the heart into his chest again. Hearing this, he smiled and said, It's just that most entrances can't stop me. In fact, there are still many entrances that can stop me. The entrance that I chose was one of them. Unfortunately, I was too reckless. If I had known that the Tao sovereign path would have such a restriction, I would never have chosen that entrance. The man was a little regretful and sighed helplessly. Hearing this, Luo Fan remained expressionless. He said faintly, You are still hiding something. When the man heard this, he was slightly stunned. When he saw Luo Fan's unwavering gaze, as if nothing could shake him, his heart moved. He sighed and said, Indeed. In fact, if it weren't for the restriction of the Tao sovereign path, given the danger of the Tao sovereign path, I would be able to live forever even if I am injured. I will never continue to explore the path of Tao Master. I'd like to hear the details, Luo Fan said faintly. Hearing this, the man said, In this world, there can't be two selves. This is the restriction of the Tao sovereign path. Hearing this, Luo Fan suddenly understood why the man was so eager to return to the Tao sovereign path. Even though they had just met, the man dared to risk his life to ask for help. There could only be one self in this world. What did this mean? It meant that once two selves appeared at the same time, one of them would definitely be erased. In other words, the cultivator who was sent out of the Tao sovereign path. If he was sent to the future, it would be fine. It was equivalent to safely escaping from the Tao sovereign path. Even if he lost a long period of time, after all, he was no longer in danger. But if he was sent to the past by the Tao sovereign path, the situation would be completely different. Being sent to the past was equivalent to a countdown to death. Once time gradually came to the time when he was born, he would inevitably die. After all, this was a Tao sovereign world without other space-time dimensions. The self here was linear. In other words, the newly born self was the self that came out of the Tao sovereign path. Under such circumstances, no matter which self disappeared, it meant that the future self that came out of the Tao sovereign path would also disappear. And this also showed the fact that the cultivator who came out of the Tao sovereign path would inevitably be sent to a time before he appeared in this world. Maybe before he was born, or after he entered the Tao sovereign path in the future. So, your time is almost up? Luo Fan asked. Hearing this, the man nodded and sighed. Yes. According to my calculations, I will be born in less than 10,000 years. If I have not entered the Tao sovereign path by then, it will be the time of my death. Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded in understanding. 10,000 years might be a long time for ordinary people, but in the eyes of Luo Fan and this man, This period of time was probably as short as the blink of an eye. This made the man in front of him anxious. Suddenly, Luo Fan's heart shook. Why am I here? He remembered that although he was not a native creature of this world, he had been in this Tao's sovereign great world for more than 1,000,000,000 years. In other words, he had already existed in this great world 30 million years before he entered the Tao sovereign path. In other words, right now, there were two of him in this world. One of them was currently reconstructing his worldview in a certain cave abode, while the other was conversing with this man here. According to the rules of the Tao's sovereign great world, this situation would not have happened. It was impossible for him to be sent to this time 30 million years ago. Even if he came here, he would definitely be killed and erased immediately. However, this was not the case. What the hell is going on? At this time, he was no longer in the mood to pay attention to the man in front of him. The man saw that after he said that, Luo Fan's expression suddenly changed, and then after that, as if he was thinking about a matter of life and death, his heart suddenly thumped. He had vaguely realized that something was wrong. However, at this time, Luo Fan could be said to be his only hope, but he could only watch the changes in Luo Fan's body. He could not respond at all. He did not know what to say to persuade Luo Fan to put aside all other thoughts and help him. Maybe I should go meet myself. Such a thought flashed in his mind. At this moment, he faintly felt that somewhere there was a sense of existence that was no different from him. The place where that sense of existence was located was the location of the chaotic area in his memory. It was countless trillions of light years away from here. It was only because of such a long distance and the cave mansion that he did not immediately sense the existence of his other self. No, I can't meet with my other self. The time of this big world is linear and the past me is my past. Back then, I didn't meet my other self, so I can't meet him now. Otherwise, the result may be out of control. Soon, he dispelled his thoughts. Just thinking about it, he could roughly imagine what would happen if he went to meet his other self. Because of the conflict between the past and the present, he might really be completely erased. Whether it was him in the past or the present, it was very likely that he would be obliterated by the big world itself in the process. The reason for this was very simple. The big world itself rejected different space-time dimensions. If he went to meet his past self, and if both of them were fine, it would inevitably create another space-time dimension, which was the current him. It would lead him on a different path from the past him. And this was obviously challenging the big world itself, so naturally, he would suffer the backlash of the big world. Right now, he could only sense the strength of the fourth tribulation. If he suffered the backlash of the big world, how could he have any chance of survival? It was only natural that he would be erased. Thinking of this, the sense of urgency in his heart increased. Perhaps the rule of the road of Tao Master is not that two selves cannot appear in this big world at the same time, but that the past cannot be changed. Perhaps the reason I can survive now is not because I am special, but because I am here. This does not change the fact that my past self did not sense the existence of my other self. Perhaps the reason why other cultivators can't do this is because of the time when their selves were born. Because the connection between the two selves formed an indescribable sense, and then caused the cultivators in the past to have a sense that did not originally exist. This led to the tentative birth of different space-time dimensions, challenging the big world, which led to the erasure. Luo Fan soon found his own explanation for the fact that his situation was different from other cultivators. This explanation, compared to feeling that he was special, and the rules of the road of Tao Master did not work on him, was more believable. After all, Luo Fan had already passed the second stage of Chunibyu. The idea that he was the most special person in the universe, that he was shrouded in the halo of the protagonist, and that the rules that worked on other cannon fodder would not work on him would obviously not appear on him. I'm sorry, it seems that this deal can't be carried out. At this time, Luo Fan said to the man apologetically at this time. Of course, he was still apologetic, but his expression was firm and unshakable. After all, although he had already determined that his guess was very likely to be true, and that it was very likely that he would continue to exist in this world, it was only a guess. However, this was only a guess after all. He couldn't be 100% sure if it was true or not. Moreover, even if he was sure that it was true, so what? The fundamental reason why he could exist safely was that the sense between the two selves had been cut off. The him in the past could not sense the existence of the present him. In this case, if the sense between the two selves broke through the barrier of the cave residence, and broke through the state of mind that the past self was recasting the world view, wouldn't he be completely erased by this big world? Under such circumstances, how could he have time to talk about any deal with this man? No matter how precious the piece of iron in the man's hand was, how could it be more precious than his own life? Hearing this, the man instantly looked like he had lost his parents, and there was even a sense of despair in his eyes. As his emotions changed, the decaying aura above his heart began to surge crazily. In the blink of an eye, it had already swept through his entire body, and directly corroded his entire flesh and blood, turning this intact man into a skeleton in the blink of an eye. Moreover, even the skeleton could not withstand this kind of decay. During this process, it was still rapidly turning black. It was obvious that it was still being continuously corroded, becoming more and more decayed. Seeing this, Luo Fan took a few steps back to avoid the peak of the decaying aura. Only then did he say, "Actually, although we can't carry out the deal, I have a way to prevent you from being erased." Hearing this, there was a flash in the skeleton's eyes, and then all the decaying aura began to quickly retract. In the blink of an eye, it had completely retracted into the still intact heart.